How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going.
I thought I'd just put the recording button on straight away. How's your day been today?
Oh, it's been pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I have this notebook that I've sort of been working in all year. Just a spiral bound notebook, and I've just kind of been filling it up with different things, and that's kind of what I'm going to be drawing off of today.
Cool. Let me tell you something that happened today, though. You probably have your phobias. One of my phobias is wasps. And I woke up at 6 a.m. and went into my sitting room, and there was just a swarm of wasps in my room. And yeah, and there's a nest on my roof. So I'm like completely wired right now. I can hear them humming up there. I know what that humming is now.
Are they still in your room?
Oh no, they're not in my room.
But you can hear them though.
Yeah, I can hear them. They're
Yeah.
humming. It's like this really, really quiet, dim humming sound. Yeah. And it's like my worst fear. People always tell me stories of when they have nests, and it makes my skin crawl. And I have one now, and I feel so weird coming in and out of my house just knowing that it's there, up there on my roof. I'm full of adrenaline dump. So
I feel the same way, kind of, because we got to get into some dark stuff today. Not that that's what we want to focus on or anything, but definitely going to be part of it.
Oh yeah, we are.
Yeah, it'll be like a John Carpenter horror movie with a happy ending. On our last episode, we were fixing to enter the cave, the underworld cave, and slay the cannibal queen.
Have you seen the 13th
I saw the
Warrior?
movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That was good.
The 13th Warrior, it stuck with me. It made a big impression. I hadn't seen that movie for a long time. And yet, when we were talking about the Fool and we were talking about the wild men and the catastrophic mindset, the 13th Warrior popped into my head. And the scenes where they're discussing these berserker cannibal hordes who would prey on villages and would use terror tactics such as mimicking catastrophic events, such as the dragon, the glowworm. And in the movie, they show this glowworm coming down from the hills very slowly. And you see them preparing for battle with these villagers, and they've helped them to train and to build up reinforcements. But there's this glowworm coming down along with the mist in the movie, in this scene. And they all think it's a dragon until Banderas, his character, he goes out into the distance and sees past the fog and sees that it's just a mass of torches moving as one, making it seem as if it's a dragon. And we could go on and on about the other tactics that they use. The bear claws, bear suits from the carcasses of these bears. Okay. You were saying we left off with the cannibal cult and we were slaying the queen. Well, let's go back to the beginning because there's a lot to talk about there. Okay, so there's a talk of demons and these Nordic warriors and their Arabic tag-along, who's an ambassador. They find out that these demons are ransacking these villages. The way that they talk about their sacred objects and the way they move and the way they dress, this demonic plague has come upon them. So they go to hunt whoever is their leader. But just before then, they realize that this is a group who has a female leader. They have a queen. They eventually follow some scouts back to where their lair is, and they go underground. So they go down into this cave and they hunt her. When they go down there, this group, they're like animals, and they're rolling around in this pit, and they almost seem to be like in this orgiastic pose. There's human bones everywhere. They've been feeding on the villagers. There's bear corpses everywhere, complete debauchery, complete loss of any humanity. So eventually they find the queen, and she has this snake wrapped around her neck. She's got a poisonous claw that she dips in this black poison. And the leader of the Nordic warriors, kills her, but he gets attacked by her, and he actually inevitably ends up getting killed by her. This is how dangerous she is. She has control over this whole cult, and they realize that this is the main weak point. But what happened to this group that caused them to be like this, where they were severed from the earth, severed from their integrity, that their integrities merge with this queen? And why does she become the most important thing to kill? Even though the strongest of their warriors leads the group into war, it's this queen that they have to kill. And it's also this queen that inevitably kills the Nordic hero, who kills off the leader of the men. So it's the queen who inevitably kills the hero. But what is this film saying here with the underground scenes? They hide in the day, they sleep during the day, they stay in the cave, which is also synonymous with the mother's womb. And they have a queen, just like a wasp's hive has a queen. Something that's being said in this movies is that with these groups that have been infected with this emotional plague, because they've been severed from the natural rhythms of the earth, because they've been severed from nature, they've become animalistic, deranged. You see this group of cave dwellers, and they're in oblivion. They've completely given up their selfhood to this cannibal cult. Yeah.
So Frank Herbert was aware of this as well. I've come to a new realization recently with Frank Herbert. I've always been fascinated with Frank Herbert ever since I started picking up his books, like over a decade ago. But I've recently realized how literal he actually is being. He's straight up just telling you like it is. Not just with Dune. And Dune talks about the Bene Gesserit, the witches.
Bene
Talks
Gesserit,
about
yeah.
the Fremen who live in the caves, why they have a mindset that they do, how their goddess, priestesses operate within the caves, what role they have. But not just with Dune. He's got other books as well. He's got Hellstrom's Hive, talking about these people who live underground. He's got Santaroga Barrier or Saratoga Barrier, forget how it's called, but this is talking about a valley called the Saratoga Valley, where they have caves in there, and these people have a whole different mindset. He's got a book called The Whipping Star.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a cave motif in there as well, but the follow-up book from that is called The Dasadi Experiment, and that has all sorts of shit about caves, but at the same time he's like in depth psychoanalyzing these people in the book, what they're up to, why they think the way they think, and why they are compelled to act the way they act based on survival, what they perceive, because it's like they've woven their own reality into a perception that, from a perceptual point of view, forces them to act the way they do. When an outsider's just looking at them like, "Are you fucking insane? Like, just cut it out." But to them, they've woven this reality around their own minds. It's retarded, is all it is. But it's a vastly complex way of being retarded.
Right. I just keep wanting to hit back on this, to nail it. Like the deeper meaning of the 13th Warrior, the malefic matriarchal cults needing the queen to continue on, and they're lost if the queen is killed. They have no individuality. They're mimicking pack animals, and humans, when they act like animals, they're more debased than animals because animals don't have a choice about it, right? So they need the cave, they need the safety of the cave, they need the goddess, right? They need her caves and her underground chambers and her rivers, underground rivers, and needing the safety of her womb, needing her hive. Reminds me of the queen's death, like they paraded her body around the whole the whole of the British Isles for days, and then had a massive funeral, this massive outpouring of emotion, of love for her. The way the earth used to be before, I've heard that the earth is layered like an onion now because of it. And to get back to parts of the earth that were there before on the surface, you have to go underground. So you're needing to get to the hollow earth. You're needing to get through the layers of this onion. And when you're not, you're severed from it. This group of cannibals are docile and sleepy when they're underground, like they're recharging. That really came through in the movie as well. Getting lost in her labyrinth, right? Those myths of the labyrinth and getting lost and using Ariadne's thread to find the way out. But if you don't, you become one of these Dionysian lost souls trapped in the labyrinth forever. In the past, going in the cave, doing those sacred ceremonies, that was all to do with re-strengthening after the cataclysm, as you said once, using the earth as recuperation. When the surface was safe to inhabit it again, that must have taken some orientation as well, and thus some groups did adjust. We were all severed from it. There must have been a time, there's certain places around the world where whole cities are honeycombed, and there's deep tunnels that go underground for miles and miles and miles, and we just don't know where they go. What were we inhabiting those areas down there? Was a good portion of the human race down there for a long time? Did we become accustomed to it, and then coming back up to the surface, did we bring back this rot? Did we bring back this like just this illness with us because we had to adjust to that again? Just this idea of a collective as well, that we have to remain in a collective. There's so much we could talk about here, you know. Sorry, I've trailed on a little bit. You go on ahead.
We talked about Immanuel Velikovsky and his book Mankind and Amnesia. But he wrote that book because he was concerned about the possibility that mankind would steer itself towards a repetition of events which would mirror the planetary catastrophes which happened. So I'll read part of his book here. He says, quote, "Amnesia need not erase all memory. It may affect only certain areas of the past. Such cases are very numerous, and rarely is a neurotic personality free from some area of oblivion. Characteristically, the oblivion erases the most painful or terrifying reminiscences. Another of the pathological forms to which amnesia may lead is what is called mental scotoma. Psychological scotoma is an inability to observe certain situations, though they are obvious to other persons. A man may not see an evident fact or not recognize an obvious situation, though his intelligence and rationality should produce an immediate realization and proper reaction. Whereas the phenomena of total amnesia is rare, the observance of partial amnesia or psychological scotoma are daily experiences in psychiatry and psychoanalysis, and the leader himself most probably has succeeded in erasing the conscious memory some painful occurrences, greater or smaller, that his ego cannot face. Much of the maladjustment, failure and floundering, guilt feeling and self-punishment, or aggressiveness, hatred and hostility, pathological inclinations and sexual aberrations, criminal impulses and acts, suicide and murder, or detachment from reality and flight into madness can be traced by correctly applied analytical procedure to impressions erased from the conscious memory, traumatic occurrences, in short, to contents submerged. From the mind's dark recesses, they pilot the personality towards its bizarre behavior and not seldom toward a repetition of the traumatic experience. This repetition is sought in the form of a return to the scene of the first experience, or in a fixation on abnormal sexual objects, or in a selection of an occupation offering a regular substitute for an act repressed from the conscious memory. That's Immanuel Velikovsky, Mankind and Amnesia.
Exactly.
They didn't register it. It says that a man may not see an evident fact or not recognize an obvious situation. Sort of like get in the basement, before the tornado runs
right.
into you.
No, I'm aware of that quote, Caleb. And because I'm not finished with that movie, The 13th Warrior, because I really want to hear your opinion of it and the things that stuck out to you. But when you were talking about that quote just there, going back to that movie, what happens when this cannibal horde, this cave cult, when they attack the villagers nearby, the villagers think that the horde are demons, right? And they think that this horde, when they're coming down from the hill and the mist is gathering, they think that it's a dragon, but it's not a dragon. It's a catastrophic mindset. It goes into an irrational mode where it almost begins to mythologize reality, leave things out, and it takes a rational man to go out there and see that they bleed, see that they're using tactics, be made aware of their weaknesses and strategic weaknesses. So with catastrophe and the trauma, it strips people away of any rationale.
It can, yeah. And Velikovsky stated in his book that he intended the publication of his book to actually stir up and bring to consciousness those repressed memories in order to help mankind not steer itself towards a repetition of it. But the whole book was geared towards celestial events that were happening in the sky that mankind witnessed from ground level.
Well, I've also been taking a look at the novel Mankind and Amnesia, and I have a quote from Velikovsky as well. A probe touching a cell in the brain makes a forgotten memory vivid. So vivid that the person believes himself to be living in a situation that actually took place many years before. We have seen a person susceptible to hypnosis receive an oral order to be unable to see or to hear, or to move an arm and comply with the order. Is this just a pretense on the subject's part? But the same person receives an order to be like a rigid rod, and upon being placed between two chairs, head on one and heels on the edge of the other, he or she, even a slight woman in this cataleptic state, can support the weight of several persons. Whence comes this physical reserve, unavailable in the conscious life, to the person now in catalepsy? And how can an oral order, nothing but sound, mobilize this reserve? A person in hypnosis is given a suggestion to perform some act at a given time, possibly days after the hypnotic session, and to forget the command until time for its execution. Without being consciously aware of the suggestion and without a timepiece, the individual executes the command precisely on time. Is it then that a time measuring device is implanted in the human brain? What causes forgetting and remembering? Least of all does the hypnotist, be he a trained psychiatrist or an uneducated variety performer, know what makes hypnosis work. What are the physical and mental reserves that can be brought into action with the simplest of tools, a human word or gesture? The limits are suddenly so much wider that the capabilities used in daily life seem but one octave of a full keyboard. And those quotes that we just went into there, I think explain, or rather bring to mind, a lot of questions. How is a person hypnotized? How is a person able to be hypnotized? What in nature put that mechanism in a person where they can give up their freedom to someone else and that person can use them as a puppet? It's from here I want to go into one of the first cases of sorcery in Britain, the key to world history. It's the story of Moses. who coordinated his attack on Egypt in line with a volcanic eruption and celestial upheavals. They were saved by God. That's what they believed. And Deucalion was warned by a volcano that a flood was coming. Deucalion, who was also Noah. Noah's ancestor knew the magic of firearms as well. The trauma of this and the coupling of the savior complex around the timing of wars around cometary visitations is hardwired into us and can be dredged up any time a sorcerer of serious clout wishes. And this is what Commons Beaumont has to say about Abram, otherwise known as Abraham or the High Ram. The first reliable clue we possess to the early civilization of the Bronze Age may be traced with some certainty to the coming of Abraham, more properly Abram, son of the Ram, that is the spiritual son of the god Ammon or Hermes, the deified genius of magism or druidism, Abram becoming the archmagus or chief druid of the south. Sometime about 2160 BC, according to revised Bible chronology, and as stated by Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews, the patriarch led a strongly armed following of Hebrews, Ibeas, from the ancient parent city of the of Chaldees, conducting them eventually to the territories named Canaan and Mizraim, where he built up a powerful state. Indications point to his success owing to the possession of firearms when such were very scarce and difficult to obtain. He was an initiate into the mysteries of the Cabriri gods and was himself described as the son of Terra. Now this also transcribes to the word Terra, a maker of magic instruments, and hence the word teraphim or terra images, no other, in fact, than fire weapons of war. Teraphim. In the investigation of the past, the more importance of firearms cannot be too strongly stressed. We are aware from modern histories of the effect of firearms when first used against savage races, the terror they caused, the savage's immediate subjection, and the tendency to deify the owner of such magic. And this is really important for what we're going to talk about today. In prehistoric times, when the possessors of such fire weapons employed them, the same results were obtained, and these pioneers cleverly made a profound mystery of such so that their victims believed that they were mighty gods. As we know from the scriptures themselves, Abram was himself an initiate, as the son of Terra implies, and brought with him his Cabriri gods. Otherwise, he established armament factories, always hidden underground, in some cave or convenient secluded area. Tenth, teraphim is translated as an image or god, such instruments being procurable in patriarchal days by certain wealthy men. He goes on, the patriarch was the first to declare that there was one God, the creator of the universe, and that irregular phenomena visible on land and sea, a reference it would seem to cometary and meteoric bodies so dreaded by the Chaldean or Gnostic sages. The sun, moon, and other celestial bodies were all controlled by a supernatural, all-seeing eye above. All these outstanding and characteristic places, Hebron, Ramah, Mizpah, and Shiloh, may be identified at Avebury, Wiltshire, and in its immediate neighbourhood, all being interconnected. Now, isn't that funny? Because all our lives, we've been hearing that these places were originally in the Middle East. But according to Commons Beaumont, that may not be true. The patriarch established himself firmly in Mizraim as a semi-divine personage among an alien and hostile population whom he dominated by force of arms, as did likewise his successors. He claimed to receive the injunctions and precepts of his god Cronus Saturn and became the Ram or Rama of the South, a claim to divinity playing a vital part in the history of the Mizraite lands and as Diodorus implies, was later adopted by the Egyptian kings. So this is where we find out that Moses was a high druid and knew that there were celestial upheavals happening at the time. There was volcanoes going off, there was cometary visitations, and they knew that this was happening and that it was going to destroy Egypt. How far was the man we know as Moses behind this situation? We know from the scriptures that earlier he had fled from Egypt with a price on his head, and now had returned defiantly to threaten Pharaoh. Apart from the stories in Exodus of how after each plague Moses and Aaron visited the king and demanded that he should free the so-called Israelites in avarice, there is that strange account of how Moses and Aaron cast their serpent rods defiantly before Pharaoh seated on his throne, which ate or destroyed the serpent rods of the Egyptian magicians. If we read between the lines, the implication was that he threatened Pharaoh with superior weapons until he consented to this demand. Josephus throws a yet clearer light on the subject. He describes how Moses, on his return to Egypt, after a long absence during which time he had been initiated into his new god, Jehovah, or GHVH, was met on the frontier by the chief Hebrews, who at first showed disbelief in some sweeping claims he made until he produced astonishing signs which ensured their deliverance. So this whole idea that these firearms were deified, and not only that, they were seen to be as part of the catastrophe that was happening as well. It was one and the same, almost as if the Egyptians thought that Moses had control over the weather itself. What could they have been other than some advanced form of armament? He was led before Pharaoh, from whom he demanded the release of the people he was championing, and to prove his power, gave him a similar demonstration. Pharaoh angrily called him an evil man who had formerly run away from Egypt and now returned with deceitful tricks and wonders and magical arts. In order to astonish him, his comment may have been caused by chagrin, but the story in Exodus suggests that Moses was able to prove that his magical arts were vastly superior to those of the Egyptians. Not that the Egyptians were without their own serpent rods. Is there not a suggestiveness in the account of how Amenepophis required to see the gods before he rounded up the unwanted peoples? There is a highly instructive passage of Isaiah where the prophet says, "O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee after the manner of Egypt." A passage which, in veiled language, appears to denote that with these weapons, they punished the shortcomings of those they defeated and destroyed. In analysing the past, I cannot overstress how vital and important is always this problem of weapons. Moses, as I shall attempt to prove, was behind the vast movements of this period with the intention of defeating Egypt, overthrowing her power, and annexing the country for his Scythians, or more notably, the Sakai. So commenced the 13 Years' War, and rapine between the gods and the giants described in so many a myth, which directly preceded the great catastrophe. It was a war which heralded the destruction of Atlantis, because, as is said in the book of Esdras, of the devices come into the world, added to earthquakes and uproars of the people of the earth. With the retreat of Amenepophis, as told of by Isaiah, the invaders enjoyed a halcyon time. They overran Egypt, pillaged her, demanded heavy tribute from cities, enslaved many, and were accused of savagery and horrid wickedness by Manetho. Manetho's account in his version of the circumstances which preceded the Exodus, and if testimony is acceptable, it definitely proves that Amenepophis was the pharaoh of that period when the heavens themselves were in a state of chaos by the approaching comet, as shown by the incidents of the various plagues and upset, it would seem, Moses' intentions. We are told that the pillar of cloud, fog, which had preceded them went behind. In other words, it blotted them out to the eyes of their pursuers, and to overcome their predicament, the Israelites marched over the frozen waters of the Oxella. That this was no miracle may be recognized by the common sense understanding of the text. The Lord caused the sea to go back and made the sea dry, and the waters were divided, and the waters were a wall unto them. And it came to pass that in the morning watched the Lord look unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire, and took off their chariot wheels so that it drove them heavily. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. There remained not so much as one of them. The words italicized make it evident that the waters of this inland sea had frozen over, as further confirmed in Moses' paean of triumph after the Egyptians had been drowned in the quick thaw the morning following. And with the mast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together, the flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths met congealed in the heart of the sea. In plain everyday language, the waters of the inland sea were frozen over, congealed, and with this situation confronting them, the fugitives took the opportunity during the heavy night fog to cross over the frozen water. It was not a long crossing, but in the morning, when the sun peeped through the fog, and the host of Pharaoh saw that they had eluded them, they chanced the crossing also, but their heavy chariots sank into the ice, and they were drowned. Now, can you imagine that? Can you imagine that you have firearms back then, but also you've timed this attack so perfectly that not only do your fire weapons do the damage that they're supposed to, but also God comes in with his smiting and destroys your enemies. That must have been a mesmerizing sight. It must have been, let's say, it must have screwed them up pretty bad, because the weapons of war, we know from the First World War and the Second World War that the traumas that these people come back with are real deep. And yet these people in ancient times, they saw this as God coming to save them. And from then on, when catastrophe saves you, that's got to leave a scar. And when someone has heavier weapons, or when someone says that there's a sign in the sky and that you need to follow them because this sign in the sky or this cataclysm that's happening is a sign that it's time to go to war, and that it's a divine declaration even. I think that's a pretty good introduction to sorcery and just what we're up against.
What you just enumerated lays a pretty good foundation for a certain thesis which explains cataclysm, and this is a thesis which deserves being looked at, and it involves accounts of sorcery actually being able to be decoded in terms of actual technology. What I can present today is a different track of thought, which I can do my best to lay out a foundation for. It is not to negate the track of thought which you just enumerated. It is simply something which the investigator needs to weigh and balance and consider in addition. So what I'm about to present is just starting to lay the foundation of how can actual sorcery actually be a thing. And sorcery in terms of non-physical, more along the lines of the invisible realms. So this will be something to consider in addition to the physical explanations, which involve technology, firearms, things like that.
Okay.
So let's begin to lay this foundation.
I'm ready.
And that's good. That's a good stuff you got into.
Of course. It was in respect to amnesia and how we've forgotten this, but once you understand the Stockholm syndrome that this causes, when in the past not only cataclysms did they hurt humanity, but they also helped humanity, or they were seen as even saving them, as being on their side, as being divine providence. I just think that that's a really profound idea, but I'm ready. Let's go, Caleb.
The first foundation I want to lay is the idea of the emotional plague. And it's a phenomena that exists today, and it's a phenomena that existed in ancient times. I have a quote by Charles Konia. He states, "Political discussions are always mystical and morally tinged based on ideas of the good guys, us, versus the bad guys, them. In order to be rid of mystical thinking, one has to think functionally. Thinking in terms of the three layers of the biopsychic apparatus allows one to think functionally about people's political ideas and behavior, and not get lost in endless, non-productive political discussions. It is from the three layers of their biopsychic apparatus, the biological core, the destructive middle layer, and the superficial layer, or surface, that people function, and all human ideas and behaviors must be understood as expressions from them. The emotional plague's destructiveness to the American nation has been patiently organized over decades and is being orchestrated by communist leaders who, together with the help of well-meaning but naive true liberals, profess to be loyal Americans. The communists' ultimate goals is to eliminate, give away, all the freedoms that Americans have fought for and enjoyed and the spontaneous core expressions of their lives. The emotional plague is being spread through society by mass media, big tech, and global corporations, as well as far left individuals. The plague's current strategic target is America itself, and then it will spread globally to bring the social order as we know it to a standstill. The current order will be replaced and under the control of leftist ideologues, with the ultimate goal of establishing a brave new international world. The emotional plague is a scientific term that has two components, a somatic one, emotional destructiveness, and a psychic one, evil. It can appear on all levels of social organization, from individuals to groups, including political parties. People resist recognizing the existence and destructiveness of the plague, partly because the disease is present in latent form and can appear in anyone under the right circumstances. Moreover, both components must first be recognized in oneself before one can have a true understanding of the plague's destructive operation in others. A further obstacle is that, until recently, a functional understanding of human emotional life and determining social behavior, both healthy and sick, has not existed. This knowledge is made available to the public in the new science of social orgonomy. The systematic destruction of America by the emotional plague through political activism of the far left, in front of everyone's eyes, is eroding our society in every possible way, and yet few people are able to take a step back and see what is happening. Here are some of the ways. Emotionally, by eliminating feelings of heartfelt love for America. Historically, by the destruction and rewriting of America's history. Geographically, by the elimination of America's borders. Economically, by eliminating the free market and replacing it with the socialist state. Developmentally, by replacing individual freedom of thought with groupthink. Morally, by giving every kind of human thought and behavior equal value. Quote, different strokes for different folks. Psychologically, by infiltrating and controlling the Democratic Party, resulting in the destruction of the American two-party system. Socially, by destroying individual authority and replacing it with the collective authority of Big Brother. All of these symptoms of the emotional plague are the result of a single cataclysmic event, the transformation of American society from authoritarian to anti-authoritarian. How is the emotional plague recognized? by knowing that people are damned if they do something about it and damned if they don't. The emotional plague operates by generating immobilization and confusion. It is recognized by its destructive effects on human life. The plague's recognition and eradication depend on people learning a new way of thinking, functional thinking, about social matters, and not being stuck in their old moralistic thinking of right versus wrong. That's by Charles Konia.
That's a hell of a quote, man. Yeah, it made me think of this thing that's happened lately. Near where I live, they have found more evidence of where the actual Hadrian's Wall was built. So the line that's drawn across the map right now, they largely know where it went for the most part. But there's a few grey areas where they're not sure because they haven't digged it up yet, or they haven't excavated. But they found a piece today, and it's like this big celebration. It's like, oh, we found more of the Hadrian's Wall. And it's bittersweet for me. A lot of people would see this as pure heresy in these parts because Hadrian's Wall is such a big thing here and point to tourism and the meaning of it, the history for Northumbria and everything else. But yeah, it's a big celebration. And although I want to share in this celebration, and I do in a way, but also feeling not only a little bit angry and frustrated that people still care about Hadrian's Wall rather than what happened on either side of it in both Scotland and England. And they don't care about the tactics that were deployed to segregate one part, basically cutting off the head of the British Isles. This brutal act it's venerated. I was walking along the Hadrian's Wall one day, and an American came across and we started talking, and he said it was like a pilgrimage. And I understood what he meant, and he is correct, but I think there are far deeper pilgrimages than Hadrian's Wall, and also the story of Hadrian's Wall itself. If you actually knew the real story of Hadrian's Wall, according to Commons Beaumont, and also a lot of chroniclers around here that don't get any airtime other than the standard chroniclers, which are always cited, that Hadrian's Wall wasn't even Hadrian's Wall, but that'll have to be a topic of discussion perhaps maybe later on in this one. But for now, let's just keep it to this. I was pissed off because even now, Hadrian's Wall is a barrier to history. In these parts, in Newcastle, in the northeast, Hadrian's Wall is the biggest tourist site if you're a historian, if you're interested in finding out about your history. All roads point to Hadrian's Wall in this part of the country. And yeah, but as you were saying, the emotional plague, I think that's part of it. People, they deify Hadrian's Wall, even though it was something that was deployed to screw the country up and to keep it manageable, controllable. People still venerate that, prioritize that, other than finding out about who was here before the Romans were.
It sounds about as retarded as celebrating St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, tell me about that. Why is that so retarded?
Most people just celebrate St. Patrick's Day and don't even realize what the history about it is or anything. You got some people who realize St. Patrick, that story was about the genocide of the Druids in Ireland by the Christians. I've come across, Connor McDarry's story about it. He has a whole different theory about it, which still isn't a good thing. Still nothing to celebrate. But his is a bit different. He says that it's a fake story and was designed to make it look like Ireland has been Christian ever since the time attributed to St. Patrick, which was in the 400s. But he says that in point of fact, there was no St. Patrick, and it was much, 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 much later before Ireland actually did become Christianized. More like 1000 AD, or 900s or 1000 sort of range. But, people celebrate St. Patrick's Day. They have no clue what it is. We even have people over here in the United States that don't know what July 4th is actually about. They think it's about fireworks,
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, Guy Fawkes
yeah.
Night is the same thing over here. They don't realize that Guy Fawkes Night, otherwise known as Bonfire Night, is based on an ancient pagan ceremony. And you could even also attribute the ceremony to Bridget as well. She was also the goddess of the sun, and she served the same purpose. They would set fires alight, they would jump through them, they would even send their livestock through them. As strange as it seems now, it was almost as if the flames were blessing them to continue on through the winter. And it was also a chance for the community to come together and say goodbye, because they knew that at the end of that winter, some would not be returning to the next.
So these pagan festivals are calendar festivals which mark out the path of the sun in seasons. There's 8 points in the year. There's the 2 equinoxes, the 2 solstices, and then the 4 other points are the midway points, halfway between the fall equinox and the winter solstice. The path of the sun is called the zodiac. Zodiac means animal, zodiac, so animal. And each of the 12 signs is an animal. Basically, you have
Yeah.
the ram, the bull, the twins, the crab, the lion. And you can get into the fascinating history of those 12 signs. Those divided into 12 for a good reason. But this pagan calendar is divided into 8, and it's not natural. There is more significance to the 8 points, the 8 cardinal directions of a compass. It's not to say they didn't use sort of an 8-fold division of the year, but what we have now is definitely not natural. You can check out what's called the armillary sphere band and these planispheres. This is depicting the way that the zodiac is not in alignment with the North Star. So you take the North Star, which is in the Little Dipper, and it's not in the center of the zodiac. It's in the center of the celestial sphere, because our celestial sphere is oriented to our axis of rotation, but our axis of rotation is not in alignment with what it used to be. What it used to be is referred to as Albion, and we talked about Albion last time. That picture you shared of William Blake.
Yeah, William Blake's pre-cataclysm man before the
Exactly.
cataclysm. William Blake's Vitruvian man. That's the phrase I was looking for.
See, that quote I just read about the emotional plague, he talks about the 3 biopsychic layers that we're operating under today. You have the biological core, the destructive secondary layer, and the social surface, the persona. Well, that image by William Blake of Albion is not got the second 2 layers. The blanketing over of what we are at the core. So what we're going to track now is the corruption of Albion, and as a result, the solar system itself.
Well,
Uh,
I don't know if this will help, but I have a quote to start with, since that you brought up Albion from Women Would Read, and this chapter is called Albion. As travellers who have lost their way by night, gaze ever towards the east for the first rays of light and hope, so we who grope in the darkness of antiquity must direct our eyes to the land of the rising sun, whence learning and life itself first sprang. Listen, then, to the romance of the East. Darnus, king of Greece, had 50 sons, whom he married to the 50 daughters of his brother Augustus, king of Egypt. But soon these women thirsted for dominion, and conspired secretly to slay their husbands and to rule in their steads. But the youngest and the most beautiful had a tender heart, which crept from her lips in words of warning to her father and her spouse. Then they were all seized and set adrift in ships upon the sea, which after many storms bore them in safety to a large and uninhabited island. There they stayed and named it Albion, after Albina, their eldest sister. And here they maintained themselves by the chase, killing the deer and the boars, the wild bulls and large birds, which they found in forests with arrows and bolts and bowstrings and snares and pitfalls. And while filled with meat and drink, and with lustful thoughts, they lay sleeping on the ground, covered with the skins of wild beasts. Dark, brooding spirits swept towards them from the sky and encircled them with their shadowy arms, and intoxicated them with their flaming breath. By these were born huge and hideous giants, which soon bore others, till they filled the whole land with a strange and fierce crew. So yes, how did Albion become corrupted? Well, when you were talking before and talking about the way that the land was before and the way that we were orientated geographically, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, but the electromagnetism of the planet was different than it is now. So that is going to affect the balance centers in our brain between our ears, which tell us where we are on a certain place on the planet or which space we're inhabiting. That would have messed with all that, with every creature on the planet. And not only that, just going away from that for a second, it would make sense that there are still some places on the planet that still have murmurs of what the planet used to be, what electromagnetic signal the planet was giving off at one point. Certain places in Europe have names like Paul de Leon or the Line of Leon, and either have a prefix or the Leon comes after the name. But what is this Leon line? What is this idea that was brought up by Alan Delaney, that these dragon lines hold some particular channel of energy, or it's channeling some form of force or life force of the planet, of every creature on the planet, and also the planet itself? What are these Leon lines, and do these lines, these dragon lines, some people call them, are these places possibly places that were fragmented and were stretched across the planet when the great cataclysm happened? And not only that, are there places such as Paul de Leon that show signs, actual visible signs that this is the case, and show magnetic emanations in the sky to show that these places are special? For instance, I have a video of this massive green ring in the sky that looks like one of those plasma emanations I was talking about that came out of the volcanoes for that Mexican volcanologist and esoteric painter who described these emanations coming out of these volcanoes. Well, go to certain places on the planet, and like this Paul de Leon in France, caught on camera was this massive green ring, almost like the logo for The Wizard of Oz. It was just this huge, big emerald green ring, and it's a massive zero in the sky. First of all, when I saw this video, and I also thought of the name of the place, Paul de Leon. Now, are these places on the planet possibly in tune with and still have like spectral remnants of the soul of what the planet used to be before, and that's why they're so safely guarded? That's why these places are almost kept secret.
You
Alan
read my
Delaney did.
mind. This is precisely what I'm getting into right next. So I have a series of quotes here, which is talking about energies.
3 episodes now.
Yeah, these quotes come from people in the late 1800s, and they have some interesting things to say about what they were studying. This comes from Baron Karl Reichenbach, who was originally a chemist, and towards the latter half of his life actually began to investigate a new form of energy which could only be detected by certain people. So it was an energy that influences the nervous system. And he actually went to find sleepwalkers, somnambulists, and conducted some very, very good experiments with these people in order to document the different qualities of this energy, which he called Ode. He named it after Odin. He says,
I see.
Ode is itself something material. It is apparently a highly subtle form of matter, constituting possibly enough the medium through which organized living matter is controlled by mind. Ode is a force in nature hitherto unknown. It is akin to the great natural forces of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, chemical affinity, etc. Ode pervades the whole universe. Wherever there is magnetism, heat, electricity, friction, motion, chemical action, or putrefaction, Ode is actively developed or concentrated, and it may be perceived under favorable circumstances. It is a peculiarity of Ode that not everybody can perceive it. Acute odic perception is comparatively rare. Its possession is called sensitiveness or odic sensitiveness, and its possessors are styled sensitives. The marks of sensitiveness are numerous, but the main ones are natural somnambulism, that's sleepwalking, and readiness to fall asleep under mesmeric influence. When Ode is actively developed as by magnetism, it radiates out from the generator, and a high sensitive can see the rays in the dark, but not in the light. The odic rays, seen in the dark, resemble a light smoke or a misty flame. There is therefore in man a dormant power which in certain nervous disease conditions is awakened and made active.
Mm.
That is Baron Karl Reichenbach from his book Ode and Magnetism. The next quote comes from Eliphas Levi, who was one of the famous occultists from the late 1800s, early 1900s. You can throw in some of the other famous ones like Dion Fortune, Aleister Crowley, MacGregor Mathers, Arthur Edward White. These are interesting people to look into. So this is what he says. There exists an agent which is natural and divine, material and spiritual, a universal plastic mediator, a common receptacle of the vibrations of motion and the images of forms, which may be called in some way the imagination of nature. By means of this force, all nervous apparatuses secretly communicate together. Thence come sympathy and antipathy, thence dreams, thence are produced the phenomena of second sight and extranatural vision. This universal agent of nature's operations is the Ode force of the Hebrews and of Baron Reichenbach. It is the astral light of the Martinists, and we prefer the latter explanation as more explicit. The existence and possible use of this great force is the great arcanum of practical magic. It is the thaumaturgic rod and key of black magic. That comes from Eliphas Levi, Mysteries of Magic.
I've read his work on the tarot. Very, let's just say this guy had no time for the profane.
Yeah, he was a French guy.
It's a great quote.
It's nice how he talks it up until he gets to the last part of the last sentence. Oh yeah, for black magic. He just talks it up so much, and he's like, yeah, black magic. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a knife good for cutting things. It's good for preparing your food, but it's also good for tearing through flesh if you need to protect yourself. So I guess it's like, he's got to put in the other side of the coin. So I get that. I again, you're probably getting sick of me talking about him now, but this guy called Bill Gates, and his electromagnetism theory, where there's this thing that pervades throughout the whole universe, this electric thread, and it's a magnetic thread, and they intertwine and they create atoms, and it binds the whole universe together. And I couldn't help but think of the old force when you were quoting Eliphas Levi there.
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's just what came to mind.
There's all of these mythological connections to threads and cords and ropes and things like that. Like the Native Americans have some. I know I've ran into more than one Native American stories where they're talking about like some gods that get in a fight and like one of them's caught up in this rope and like a mouse comes along to chew the rope.
Mm.
You got Loki. You know, he makes stuff out of ropes and nets and whatnot, and it's interesting to pay attention to because it seems to be very widespread throughout the world.
Sometime you'll have to take me through your knowledge of Loki, because I only really started learning about Loki when I was doing my series. But I would really like to learn the ins and outs, and it sounds like you know some stuff that I don't know about it.
Maybe I'm just starting to learn as well. But
so Bill Gates, he in a lot of ways, he's an anti-mythologist. He doesn't really know any mythologies. He's a complete rational scientist, and it's really strange because he identifies this as well, how he's figured this out logically and rationally, and it comes to this interconnected force that binds us all. But what I also find, we all have different names for it, and Reich had his name for it, organism energy, and I really like that idea as well. I don't play on games anymore, but when I did, one of my favorite games, Final Fantasy VII, there was this underlying backstory where the planet is bound together in this energy. It's called the life force. The Shinra company is building these reactors to suck up all the energy out and use it for their machinations. But yeah, we can move on.
There's so much I could say to that. It's very tempting to, but I'm going to press on.
Go for it.
All right. So the next two quotes come from
Go for it.
All right. So the next two quotes come from Dion Fortune, another one of these famous occultists from the late 1800s, early 1900s. This is from her book, Psychic Self-Defense. She says, "It is well known to all psychics that the sites of ancient temples where mystery rituals have been worked are always potently charged with psychic force. This force need not necessarily be evil, but it has a powerfully stimulating effect on the psychic centers and stirs up the subconscious forces." Her next quote says, "We have very little exact knowledge concerning these subtle forces which are the basis of both occult attack and spiritual healing. But we have good reason to believe that in their nature, they are closely analogous to electricity. They are inanimate forces, however, but have in their nature something that is akin to life, though of a low type. It has been my experience that if we work on a blended analogy of electricity and bacteriology, we get pretty near the facts, as near, at any rate, as our present state of knowledge permits. In other words, if we act as if thought possessed the combined qualities of electricity and bacteria, we shall have a sufficiently accurate method of steering by dead reckoning in the absence of certain knowledge and actual sight. If we consider the various methods used in folk magic of all ages and races, we shall observe that they are in agreement with these hypotheses. So now I will sort of add a few thoughts here. The Norse mythology, from some guys I've been listening to, does seem to be conveying information about primal forces of the universe. For example, Thor being electromagnetism, and some of the statements about Thor, like I think I was listening to Michael Denny, the Thunder Wizard. He was talking about Thor, and I guess there's somewhere in the mythology that says without Thor, the sun would burn out or something, and science confirms the fact that without the electromagnetic force, obviously the sun would just burn out, it would turn off. And when you start interpreting it like this, once you have the keys, it's like it's a cipher kind of, where if you replace the names and the mythology with certain scientific forces that we know about now, you can see what it's saying or what it's relating. But it's interesting because it also blends it with human archetypes. So there's the human archetypes and the primal forces of the universe sort of working together in a mythological form.
Right, yeah. I had this thought while you were talking there. And you said that orgone energy is Odinic energy, like Odin energy, right? I remember you saying,
Ode.
I think. No. Yeah, Ode.
Ode.
Well, when you said it, I said Odin energy. And what flashed into my head was the Valknut. And I thought you were talking about how these archetypes are almost like carving their way into human consciousness. And I thought about the Valknut and what it looks like. And it looks like a triangle, but it's been split into basaltic columns. And I think that Ogon, or the Ode energy, or the Odin energy, the Valknut represents this energy, and it bleeds into everything, right? It's the electromagnet, if you will. And the Valknut, it looks like the effect you get from magnetism when it's cutting through rock. The force, it's the pure representation in this symbol. And when you misalign the other triangles or the triangular rectangles in this Valknut, it looks wrong. And I think that can also be a good comparison to the disruption of orgone energy, how it leads to derangement, right? And like a lost highway syndrome or something like that, a road to nowhere, They're trying to build a utopia right now on the clipothic husks that the system has procured. And just look at this, right? Okay. I mean, look at our cities, right? We've got buildings like dolmens, okay? Cities built like colossal stone circles. Malls are built to emulate the wonders of the world, like one in Newcastle is called Eldon Gardens. And even the front face of it looks like a really poor facsimile of the Gardens of Babylon. And, you have the Civic Center, which is like the Lighthouse of Alexandria. And it goes on and on. They even put replicas of stone circles in the social housing estates here. And in parks, they put dolmens up as well, and megalith replicas. What is this need for the facsimiles of these temples that you were just talking about in that quote? Where does that come from? Why it's derangement,
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've been giving a lot of thought to that myself, like the entanglement of that energy. Totally see what you're saying, and yeah, been thinking about that myself. I think it was Benjamin Franklin when they first came over to America and started laying out plans for building shit. Like they had this grid system, which was 6 square miles by 6 square miles. So you ended up with 36 1 square mile blocks, and they just like repeated it across the entire continent. And turns out that a lot of the towns that we have were put on like block number 13, because like each one of these 36 square mile plots has 36 individual blocks within it, and they're numbered from left to right, I think, on the top row, and then it goes down to the second row, right to left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the top row, then from right to left on the second row, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 on the second row, then third row goes left to right again. So as soon as they got here, they started setting shit up to fall into these certain patterns, and now we're living in the result of it, and it's
Yeah,
pretty.
it's
It
wild.
sucks. Yeah.
I mean, the amount of films I've seen where that you see over the top of Los Angeles or another one of these cities that's like a grid and it just looks like a computer chip. And I'm like, how did they get away with that? Who thought that was a good idea?
Yeah, it's horrible.
I was just thinking about how this can be used, how you can stop people from finding enough balance so that you can be intuitive enough to take the right path. And I was thinking of places that are even in our own backyard, places that we wouldn't even think about. For instance, there's a place called Pleasant Hill, and right next to it is St. Michael's Mount, just next to where I live. And Harold Bailey says that these places were ubiquitous around England and also in Ireland, and that these were the ceremonial hills of any given place, that if they weren't labeled like that, they were given those labels, that these were former sacred places. And the one next to me is quite high. It towers above the rest of the houses where it's situated upon. There is a church on top of it called St. Michael's Church that's been recently renovated. Don't get me started on that. In fact, I'm just going to get into it because that place has an art installation in there. Harold Bailey also says that St. Michael is the Christianization of Mercury, and what is in the garden, this church garden of this place called St. Michael's Hill. Well, in this church garden is a infinity sign built into metal. Is an actual figure 8 lemniscate. It's a metal public modern art sculpture, but you can clearly see that this is the sign of the magician, sign of Mercury. And what's built up around and all over this hill, by the way? Oh, that's right. There is a housing estate called the Biker Wall. They actually call it the Biker Wall Estate. And I don't know if they did it to mimic Hadrian's Wall and other ominous structures like the Dark Tower out of the Lord of the Rings, but this estate has been showcased on the BBC as one of the ugliest places in Newcastle, and it's a social housing estate, and it's built right on top of what Harold Bailey says St. Michael's Mount and Pleasant Hill. They both refer back to when these sites were former sacred sites where they would ascend to the higher place to be closer to the heavens. God only knows what they would find if they decided to dig in and around that place. They'd be sure to find something really interesting.
That symbol of the lemniscate, there's the fact that the sun, throughout the course of a year, so it makes what's called the analemma of the sun, meaning that someone who goes out, say, at the same time every day and takes a photograph of the sun with the camera sitting in the same spot, the same angle. So like they go out at noon every day throughout the year. That the sun makes a figure 8. And the reason is because of the tilt of the axis, that unnatural tilt. Whereas if the axis of the earth was straight up and down and you did the same experiment, it would just be a single point of light because the sun would be in the same place every day at the same time. So you can imagine that if our axis started to correct itself and go straight again, someone doing this experiment, it would be like that figure 8 shrinking until it became that point. If it took a number of years, every year that figure 8 would get smaller and smaller until it just became that point again. So and another thought I had as well about that figure 8 symbol is you see all of those coats of arms where the two dudes are standing there holding clubs.
Yeah.
And, I had the thought, because the two sides of that figure 8 are shaped like a club or a teardrop kind of shape. And when you look at the Cernabis giant, it actually features the teardrop shape with the guy's head. But with these coats of arms with the two dudes holding clubs, it's like they're each holding half of that figure 8 as the club, which the club is kind of teardrop shaped as well. That's just a thought, though. I don't know if there's correlation there or not, but
So when I think of the wild man, I think of the fool. And I also think when we were talking about the fool being representative of the sun god, and also when you recommended Sethicus Boza and his tutorial on the tarot, he mentioned that the fool is the originator, is the original magician. And I think that plays into that. And I think it's very interesting how the sign above the magician's head, it almost looks like 2 zeros, like 0 split into 2 zeros, two spaces or 2 minds. And I just found that interesting, the way that you link that back up to, I called it orbit 0, the original orbit equinox. And when that was destroyed, that almost catalyzed our minds to split into 2. Also, it caused that fractality, that fractal mathematics you keep talking about, which has screwed up us on a physiobiological level as well. But also, when you're talking about the club there, and I also think of the magician being number 1, which suggests a pillar, right? Well, what's at the top of a pillar? It's a high place. And what could you see clearest on the high place? What were you closest to on the high place? On the cliff, if you like, just like in the Fool card. Well, you were closest to the sun's orbit 0, the orbit equinox. And the magician card presents a robed man pointing to the sky, bringing down knowledge from above to be manifested as wisdom in the world of the profane, bringing the 0 down to earth, like he's willing the remembering of the equinox age, and he's bringing 2 back into 1 again. He's using the rod to do it. The magician has the 1 and the 0, right? Because he has the wand and circle, and as he uses them as tools to translate the higher knowledge into manifest reality, piecing back together a remembrance of the golden age. And what happens when you put these pieces back together? Well, you get the Wheel of Fortune. You get, number 10 in the tarot. It's almost like that old nursery rhyme when you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But you can put Humpty Dumpty together again with the right tool, with the rod. All the king's horses and all the king's men can't put the sun back in the sky again, but the magician can.
He can, maybe, but if he's too busy fucking around with the polarity, which or taking advantage of the fact that in that fractured state where the positive and negative force, which normally attract each other, are in a situation where they are repelling, then he can direct the flow where he wants it to go. So if he's too busy fucking around, but he should, as you say, be trying to, he could do just as you say and take the holistic approach. It's not always the case, though, sadly.
No, and also with Sethicus Boza's tutorial in the Tarot, specifically the Fool and the Magician, he strips away all grandeur, and at the same time, he's supporting the idea of the Magician, of how you should be, but he strips him down and says, no, this is Loki. The Magician card, you mustn't look at this guy as the way, show her he's the trickster. I also find it very interesting that in the Nordic Tarot, the Magician is Odin, and yet Odin and Loki are almost two sides of the same coin, the evil and the good. And depending on which source you go to, Odin is the trickster and Loki is something else. So even getting into this subject, you're already tripping over yourself, and how tricky this gets very early on. It can get people so mixed up in their heads. I imagine those who aren't used to that kind of thing are going to be thrown off and sent down paths which they don't want to go down.
Well, taking it back to the foundation we laid at the beginning, I think that the circle is more corresponding to the core, and the figure 8 is more corresponding to the secondary layer. And it also symbolizes time, and the circle symbolizes eternity. So it's a state of mind, and there's really no avoiding the figure 8 state of mind to some degree, because you have to calculate, you have to make calculations all the time. If it's not muscle memory, you actually have to have to think about how long it's going to take you to do something in a methodical way, strategic way. It's going to involve a little bit of that state of mind. So it really does come down to choice. And if you look at the Norse mythologies, it's the choices that Loki made that really fucked the situation up. It wasn't so much his intelligence, it was the way he used it. So our next quote comes from Charles Konia, actually, talking about Wilhelm Reich and the functional relationship between attraction and illumination. He says, orgone energy systems attract each other and illuminate. We know that in the primordial universe, the universe before the creation of matter, it was not possible to detect motion. This is because, in the absence of matter, there are no reference points to anchor our perceptions of length and time. Attraction and illumination are related to each other and can transform into each other under certain conditions. In coexistent action, time and length transform into each other. The transformation of length into time gives rise to simultaneity. The transformation of time into length gives rise to timelessness. An experiment devised by Reich demonstrated the association of the illumination of the Earth's orgone energy field with gravitational attraction. He postulated that if daylight is a function of the Earth's illuminating orgone envelope excited by solar energy, then it must be accompanied by an increase in the Earth's attractive force. Accordingly, a sensitive balance was placed at ground level, with the balance beams precisely in a horizontal position, indicating an equal attractive force on both arms. A metal tube was partially buried in a vertical position in the earth underneath one of the balance arms. If you want to know about the metal tubes and what effect they have, go back and watch our first video, Fall of Loki. We talk about that.
Yes,
On bright sunny days, the gravitational attraction of the balance arm exposed to the metal tube was greater than the control arm, as indicated by downward deflection of the balance beam away from the horizontal position. On cloudy or rainy days, this did not occur. The experiment demonstrated the association of attraction and illumination of the Earth's orgone energy field and supported the hypothesis that illumination is transformed into attraction. Reich's observation of the transformation of illumination into attraction has recently been confirmed by changes in the rotational rate of a freely swinging joint pendulum during a solar eclipse. The inventor of the gyroscope, Jean Bernard Leon Foucault, demonstrated during the 1851 World's Fair that a pendulum could track the rotation of the Earth. During the eclipse, the pendulum took an unexpected turn, changing its angle of rotation by 13.5 degrees. That's Charles Konia. So there's a lot in this quote, a lot of things being said here, and in a very compact form. But it's going to tie in to a lot of what we're driving towards here, because a lot of occultism is the manipulation of light. We know this from all of the solar symbolism, and we generally know that. But now we should take into account that one of the things being said here is that if you fuck with light, you're fucking with gravity as well, because they're tied together, or they're related to each other, and they can transform into each other. So you mess with one, you mess with the other, basically. A pendulum that's tracking the rotation of the Earth, when there's a solar eclipse, the sun's light gets blocked out, that it actually changes the pendulum. So something to look into, let's just say.
Okay, so the amount of solar eclipses I've seen in films, I just to think of a few, there's an example I used on our last podcast with Star Wars Rogue One, just as they're about to blow up the city with the Death Star. And there's one in Apocalypto, the Mel Gibson movie. There's also one in the newest Disney series that just came out called Moon Knight. It takes up a whole episode to get up to this climactic event. And it goes on, the list is endless. I believe in The Mummy as well, there was a solar eclipse. Countless other movies we could also bring up. And you were talking about the occultism there and the power that they hold over people and what happens to people when there is an eclipse. People don't know that there's a lot of murders, that there's wars that kick off or reignited. And in general, it causes a lot of upheavals because there's still something deep within us that recalls back to those times when leaders would use eclipses to their own ends, knowing the psychological effect it had on the masses and how it made them more suggestible and more controllable and easily scared.
Yes, very true.
That's right. Yes, of course. And not just that, it's compounded. It's compounded by our sacred sites being desecrated, as I've talked about with St. Michael's Mount in Newcastle and plenty of other places, every other ceremonial hill that there is, specifically the ones in Ireland. All these sacred sites have been desecrated, mess with our electromagnetic field.
It's basically a long way of saying if you fuck with light, you're going to fuck with gravity or
I think
the attractive force.
Light cannot be separated from the electromagnetic field. I think when you start throwing prisms at light, it's going to divide into all different kinds of shapes and colors. That's what's been happening with our psychology. And I think, yes, with these cities and our last podcast when I talked about the Pisces sign looking like reactor tubes, but I also should have said, why do the reactor tubes look like volcanoes? The reactor tubes, why do they look like that? And not just that, why is there a building in Newcastle that is mimicking the look in a very minimalistic style? Why is it mimicking Fingal's Cave? But yeah, why do they have these edifices in and around governmental buildings? This is the town hall we're talking about, the local authority. And why do the politicians meet up in this replica of Fingal's Cave? in this mushroom-shaped cave replica where you go underneath it and it feels like you're entering into the king's chamber or something.
Maybe the people who built all that were operating on the same principle that Emanuel Velikovsky
Yeah.
was
same
operating
person.
on,
The same
and
person
the
who,
one that
yeah,
we're attempting to
sorry.
operate on as well, knowing that by giving all of the government people who go to those buildings and all of the general public who goes there, they're giving them the experience of a repetition of ancestral memories, even though they don't know it, that it serves the purpose of quelling any sort of impulse which would arise in the individual to seek those things out to the root. Maybe there's something natural about the land location itself there, which, if left alone, anyone there might sort of naturally begin to ask questions in their minds and naturally sort of start to explore the meaning of the place itself and the island and everything, because they're having this fake experience in this city center. That sort of just exercises that inner impulse to actually find out more. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In a subliminal way.
I told you earlier on that I have an infestation of wasps. And when I woke up at 6 a.m. yesterday, I found 13 wasps flying around my living room. And when I was watching them, I could see that they were trying to get to the hive. They were trying to get to my rooftop. They could sense that the queen was up there, and they were flying around the light in the center of my room at the ceiling. And they were just flying around there like it was the center of the galaxy. And they could tell she was there. They could sense her electromagnetic field, but they were cut off from the hive, and they were in a frenzy. I had to dispose of them, but it made me think. They were cut off from their hive, and they were acting completely irrationally and searching for a queen. And I think that's what they're trying to do with these cities, cutting us off from our sacred sites. And also, when they cut us off from our sacred sites and the profound antiquity attached to them, they affect our ancestral memory. They throw us out of alignment, our electromagnetic field out of alignment. So we're like wasps cut off from our hive, from our place of balance, and we're thrown off balance. And it's almost like the field's reversed. There's no longer community, but we become hosts to a system where our energies are amassed and messed with.
Exactly. I've basically documented the same thing over here as well, but I
And
won't get into
harvested, I meant to
that.
say. Our energies are
Oh yeah,
harvested, but yeah, go ahead.
yes.
Yeah.
No, I was just confirming, but I won't go into detail. This comes from "Blinded by Starlight," written by Frank McGillion. He says, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body will be full of darkness." And that's obviously out of the Bible. He also writes, "To the Western occultist, the term third eye generally relates to an area of the brain that includes the pineal gland, part of the pituitary gland, and the third ventricle of the brain. However, in popular accounts of esoteric belief, the term third eye is used synonymously with that of the pineal gland." He also, in his book, talks about he tries to figure out why astrology actually affects us the way it does, and he has this theory which is really interesting. When a baby is born, its skull is soft, and the skull actually has joints which kind of fuse together as you grow older. But when you're an infant being born, it's still flexible. And when it comes out of the mother, its skull actually gets squeezed. Those joints, there's a little bit of opening where light could potentially pass through the skin, through the brain, and actually contact the pineal gland. And it's the only time that light would ever be able to actually contact directly the pineal gland, because the pineal gland itself actually sits in the center of the brain where it's completely dark. So it never has any light contacted at all, except for that moment when the baby is born. That's the moment that they cast astrology based on. So that's that one moment where you get the light from the universe.
Right.
So,
Yes. Almost like just thinking of like this ray coming from the center of the galaxy, imprinting on a template, and that being the baby, and whatever stars are in alignment when the baby's born, which the cosmic rays it's getting exposed to right there. And that's how and why birth charts are made, because of these influences from as soon as the baby leaves the womb. And also I've heard that some people who, when they make birth charts, that it goes even before then, maybe to the point of conception. But the general convention is to make a birth chart from the moment you're born, which means that there must be something happening right there and then, which marks you in a sense, and it makes an indentation and creates your identity.
yeah. Some of the most powerful experiences we have is these experiences of beauty. And, the pineal gland itself actually has a lot to do with perceiving beauty and energy and things like that. And that's like the first impression. And Odin was called the one-eyed god. And you had that quote, "If thine eye be single," or saying that is your third eye. So it's almost like you're defined by your first impression of the world. And the first impression literally that you get of the world is when the top of your skull is coming out of your mother, and you have that cosmic light coming into your brain. It's the only time that the that light ever has the opportunity to contact your pineal gland directly. So it's almost like the
I
birth
can
chart.
attest to this.
Yeah.
In a moment of synchronicity, when I was leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning to be there for the birth of my child, there was this big cloud over the hospital, but there was this ray of light coming down. I'm not joking. There was this ray
Wow.
of light coming down from the sky, and it was hitting the hospital so perfectly. And it was almost like it was, yeah, like it, it was just timed so beautifully. And I'll always remember that morning walking to the hospital from the house. So yeah,
That's so cool, man.
yeah, it was amazing to see that. The very thing that you were talking about there, that's what I was feeling. A being was being shot down from the heavens into this world, shot down from the huge cosmic cannon that is the center of the galaxy, which, since finding out that I am a Sagittarius ascendant, it's become far more of a poignant subject, a serious subject for me. Now that I know a lot more about that symbol as well, of the centaur and where his bow and arrow is pointing.
That's cool. I'd gone years of my life without ever really meeting people who were Sagittarius. I actually started wondering, like, when am I going to meet Sagittarius? And then last year I started meeting loads of them all of a sudden. So
I'm a Cancer. My horoscope, my sun sign is Cancer. But when I looked up my birth chart and it said Sagittarius rising, I thought, wow, okay, so I've got water and fire to play with now.
yeah, that's just as powerful as the sun sign as well. The ascendant is
Yes.
every bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
In a different way, though. I think the clue's in the name. So ever since I found it out, I've been wondering, my baseline is a Cancer, but my ascendant is Sagittarius. So does that mean that is what I could be? That's what I'm ascending towards? I've just been having thoughts like that. I could be completely off because I'm a complete amateur at astrology, but I'm slowly picking my way at it and getting to grips with it. But it's a very interesting subject. And my other aspects, wow, yeah, explain a lot.
Yeah, my the astrology reading I had blew my freaking mind. Yeah,
Tell me
it's
about it, man.
crazy. Oh, well, it explains just about everything. I'm like, well, pretty much sums it up right there. Damn, made a lot more sense. And along with the sun sign, moon sign, and ascendant, the nodes of the moon are also like right up there. The everything else, like all the planets and everything, that kind of takes a back seat to the most important ones. And the moon actually is the most important. But yeah, it makes total sense. What's your moon sign, by the way?
I'm just looking it up now. I've forgotten it. My moon is in Aquarius.
Oh,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I can see it. I can
Really?
see it. Yeah. Well, I mean, the ascendant. That's kind of what we're doing now. We're really getting into the religions and the philosophies and everything. That's right up the alley of Sagittarius.
The two that really freaked me out was finding out that I had Pluto in Scorpio, and
Really? So you're
yeah.
not that much. You're about my age. My Pluto's in Scorpio. I was right at the end.
Oh, okay. Right. So we're both into conspiracies and looking into the darker subjects of life. And
Well, I can
also,
also say
yeah.
I can say that you've redeemed Sagittarius for me, because most of the Sagittarius I've been running into lately drive me freaking nuts, dude. So you've redeemed the Sagittarius for me.
I can have my moments.
Well, Sagittarius is half beast, half man, and that's kind of the next quote I got.
Yeah.
Um, Looking into what actually were our remote ancestors into. Like, there's a lot of people trying to get back in touch with their ancestral roots and practices. Where do we look for clues? We have what the Romans wrote about them. We have, the remnants of their mythology with the Eddas, the Poetic Edda, the Prose Edda. We have relics, archaeological, runic inscriptions with runes. But what about the early church? What were they writing about the early days when Europe was just beginning to be Christianized? What were the church fathers writing about them? It would be highly biased, obviously, but I found something very telling, because they were actually um, trying to cover something up at the time, and it's still in the records. And it's actually very telling the way that they were concerned about this particular issue that they were dealing with in the early days of the church. And the quote says, and this first part's actually written by the Pope. He sent this out to the different churches in his domain. He said, bishops are to drive out of their dioceses those who believe in and practice the wild ride. They are to preach seriously to all their people so that these beliefs may not spread. So the
The
condemnation
wild
is on
ride.
the wild ride.
Okay.
Says the condemnation is on two levels. It is forbidden to believe that you yourself ride out, and it is forbidden to believe that others do so. It is forbidden to believe that there are women who claim that they go out. One must not believe that there are beings who can transform men into wolves or other shapes, for only God can change one thing into another. Neither must one believe that there are wild women of the wood who appear in bodily form to men, seduce them, and then disappear into thin air. Here the wild women are identified with succubi, and consequently with demons. One must not believe that there are women who believe that they sneak out at night while their husbands are asleep,
Hmm.
pass through closed doors, and travel long distances to kill Christians and eat them, or else cut out their hearts and replace them with straw. Finally, one is forbidden to believe that some women claim that they go out at night through closed doors and fly up into the clouds to do battle. So, what the hell was going on back in the early church? Because, the Roman Empire just collapsed, and then the church came up, and they're over there trying to Christianize Europe, and they got all this going on.
Well, that's interesting because when you were talking about that, it was a long time ago now, it was a few years ago, but I'd learned from a channel called Gnostic Media. Jan Irvin brings forward documentation, thorough evidence, that the very earliest form of the Royal Society in England was transported over. A group of them, a sect, went off to pose as some of the settlers of the town of Salem. And when they got there, they were poisoning people with ergot, an ergot formula that caused hallucinations. And this was one of the very first psyops, documented psyops anyway, because I'm sure people could go into plenty more. But let's just stick to Salem for a second. Now, how many times have you seen reiterated, reimagined this story of the witches of Salem? It's like a big fetish over there, isn't it? And not only that, it's pretty big over here as well. That stuff flies, it gets sales, people go and watch it. Over here, it's still a semi-tradition to watch Hocus Pocus, that Disney film about the witches of Salem. They knew, obviously, that this ergot could be used, and probably learned it from the witches, that they were, from all of the documentation of the interrogations of these witches. And so they co-opted this technique and took it over to America, and now it's almost like an established event that this Salem thing gets brought up every now and again, and a film made out of it, or a TV show, or a play, etc., a book written. That's what came to mind when you're talking about that, but also sorcery in general. The witches was such a strong movement, and such a hard remnant of Druidism to get rid of, that just like Fabian tactics, ever since Emperor Fabius deployed those tactics back in Roman times, I think these Fabian tactics have been used and, for the most part, have worked against these pagan remnants that were so die-hard, that didn't want to go out without a fight, but in the end, their own techniques were used against them.
And meanwhile, during the whole process, the Vatican is stashing pagan relics in their temples, and the Vatican is full of pagan statues and everything. Maybe the Vatican knew that the witches knew how to have a good time, and they wanted to make sure that only them would have access to it at a certain point. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the very clothes signal that as well, of the cardinals and of the Pope himself.
Oh yeah. That's another thing I want to. That reminds me of something I have to mention because I don't have it written down.
Yeah.
Go ahead. The re-emergence of witchcraft in 1951, I think, when England actually repealed their anti-witchcraft laws. Then you have Gardnerian witchcraft that kind of popped up. Then you had Neil Sanders. I don't remember if do you remember Michael Desurian talking about how Black Sabbath was approached by Neil Sanders? He was trying to get Black Sabbath to actually come out and join his witches cult.
Oh, right.
And they told him to fuck off.
Oh, well, did they?
Yeah, they told him to fuck off basically, but he has this whole witch. He started a witch cult that's still active, but when he was 8 years old, his mother, his grandmother, and the other females in his family, to initiate him as a witch, they made a cut with a razor blade on his scrotum to identify him as a female. There.
Wow.
So to them, to be a witch as a man means to be a woman, at least symbolically. Now, people want to get in touch with their ancestors and whatnot. I mean, look at my coat of arms. That is not particularly the most Christian coat of arms or symbology that you'll find out there. It's more along the lines of paganism. But
Yeah.
tell me, does that look like two dudes who identify as females?
No, it
Fuck
does not.
no, it does not. Look at the Cernabis giant, the old prehistoric image on the side of a hill. Does that look like a man who is identifying as a female
No.
so he can call himself a witch? No. I'll tell you where that distortion comes from. It comes from the fourth sect. This is getting into Ralph Ellis and what he discovered about the true origins of Jesus as the King of the Jews, who led the Jews in a rebellion against Rome. And when he failed, they crucified him, but didn't kill him and sent him to England, and then re-scripted his biography to frame him as a peaceful, spiritual man, the Son of God. But they scripted that story so they could hand it to the Jews and pacify them. But originally, that historical character, Jesus, was not a Jew. He came from these royal lines out in
Yeah.
Egypt and out in Parthia. He was a convergence of several very powerful Eastern bloodlines. And when he came in to lead the Jews in a rebellion, he basically faked being Jewish. He had nothing to do with Jewish beliefs from his bloodlines. He did that because he needed cannon fodder. So he came in as like this Messiah, and they were looking for a Messiah. They were itching for a fight with Rome. He knew that, so he just came in as like this Messiah that could lead them against Rome. They accepted it. They actually made him the king of the Jews. That's why when he got crucified, they had that on the cross. It says King of the Jews. He was. But his loyalty was to his old bloodlines. And those bloodlines were Sibyl cult. And that cult involves castrating. So the priests are castrated. After the Roman Empire collapsed and the Christian church was formed, there was actually an iron curtain, so to speak, between Europe and Judea, which is where all of those castrated priest people were
Yeah.
centered. There was that iron curtain. They kept that shit out for the better half of 1,000 years.
They're called
After the
Gallis,
cruise,
right? From Galilee.
the Galli high priests
Yeah,
were castrated.
that's right. Yeah.
They served Sibyl. This is actually remind me of that movie, The 13th Warrior, kind of.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that movie went a little deeper. That dude with the horns might have been the only dude in that whole cave that wasn't castrated.
Right.
But anyways, that Iron Curtain kind of fell apart after the Crusades. Crusades happened, and what started to happen is like this almost invisible process that you don't really see in history if you don't know what you're looking for. But what started to happen was this same group of people started sneaking over in droves into Europe and started merging with all sorts of different groups. And they merged with the witches, just like they merged with so many other different groups. And I attribute the furious inquisitions of the witches not so much. It's like they were actually after those sort of infiltrators. These unnatural ideas and philosophies and practices were popping up, all over the place in a certain time frame after the Crusades.
In the Book of Enoch, wasn't it the women who decided to sleep with the giants, the fallen angels, right? The Nephilim. And for some reason, one day I was thinking about that this was almost like a marriage to the devil, to the god of catastrophe, a marriage to the god of catastrophe. And thus these queens were born and they had their own cults or cannibal hordes, or yeah, even in aristocracy, you would find these pernicious cults as well. So, for instance, in the Game of Thrones, Cersei, who sits on the Iron Throne, who becomes queen by sitting on this throne of weapons. One of the most prominent moments in this series is when she assassinates all of her competitors in one blow. She gets rid of half the royal court, and she does it by using this incendiary substance called dragon fire, and it lights up in an emerald green and just consumes everything it touches. And it's like napalm fire, but it's napalm fire. And she gets her corrupt maester to make it. Maester is also a metaphor for a druid. Exactly the same concept. The maesters are the druids. They're the keepers of the knowledge in Game of Thrones. Very studious, only very selective over the people that they school. But this renegade maester, she almost married to Cersei. He conjures this up for her and she uses it against her enemies. What else? Also in the Game of Thrones is the Red Witch. She's the one, you could say, orchestrates all of the tumult in Game of Thrones. The reason why the Red Wedding happens, why she even commits necromancy, where she gives birth. And she gives birth to a demon that goes and seeks out this high-value target. She commits sacrifices to a fire god as well. And they seem to have a monopoly in this world over this kind of sorcery. And this just echoes throughout. When you were talking before about these males who were to be inducted into these cults had to be marked in some way. One of the newer series that's just come out, The Wheel of Time, it's called. And it's also written by George R. Martin. And it's this agenda, which is pushed in The Witcher, actually, as well, and in The Wheel of Time, that females are the ones who have a monopoly on magic, who are the best wizards. And in these series, if men try to do magic, specifically in The Witcher and in The Wheel of Time, they either mess it up, they use it for evil deeds, they're trying to backstab. It's never for good, whereas the women are seen as, even when they're doing brutal and savage things, they're seen as justified, and they're always right. In this new series called The Wheel of Time, I thought this was really interesting. The males, if they try to do magic, they go crazy. So they become mentally ill and psychotic and eventually end up either destroying everything around them or someone ends up killing them. And I think it's interesting how it seems that people are becoming aware that people are waking up and know that men are slowly waking up from their slumber, from their, let's say, they're being seduced by the beauty of women and waking up from the tyranny of that. And because of this, and because they know that men are seeking out their own power from within, they are creating this psyop. They are trying to traumatize people in these shows to make them afraid of doing any magic, performing any magical rituals which may help them, any rituals of dedication to their ancestral gods, anything at all, and almost trying to get them to attach this emotional plague that you were talking about before, making men afraid of using their own power by doing this, almost like creating a amnesiac bubble for these people who are watching these shows passively. And this stuff's going in. I really don't want to delve into those magical areas like that. That trigger
subtly making it taboo, like in a really subtle way. Yeah,
aversion therapy. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
It's very sinister. It's a
yeah,
very
but when
sinister
you
thing.
catch if you are clever enough to catch those things like you are, then it becomes like very telling. You know, like even more telling when you do catch those things. Sort of like the whole quote I read about the witches flying around. It was the fact that they were so concerned about people not believing it. That's what really gave it away to me, you know? So if you can catch it when they're trying to get you to stay away from something, that really puts a question mark over it.
You know what it reminded me of, though, when I was meditating on this point? I remember it was brought up in one of the Unslaved podcasts that women hid the paternal line from men, the paternal lineage in their own children. They stopped that from happening. They blocked that from being recognized. I felt like this particular agenda matches that. They're trying to make men forget their own lineage, their own genealogy, in giving up their responsibility of the child's birthright to also originate from the father, not just the mother. And the backlash from that, when the men realized that this was not the case, that the paternal line did matter. And as a result, the paternal line became the stronger out of the two, which became another imbalance, in my opinion, because then we're losing the other half of where we come from. And yeah, it felt like another angle on that kind of sorcery. When you start messing with people's genetic bloodline, that quickly goes into areas where they're being held down by these psychological tactics, right? Which is sorcery. It's holding something back.
Some of it.
They're doing the same with magic that they did with the magic of fatherhood back then.
Right. And I was thinking about this earlier today as well. And I was thinking that when we look at the witch hunt and the crusades against the Native Americans and South Americans, I wonder if some of it was directed by a continuation of the same story. Michael brought out the fact that the women, after they were caught, were not contrite. Like, they held the grudge for getting caught throughout time, throughout the centuries. What if, in certain parts of the world, the women did have become contrite about it and, like, apologize or whatever, and those were the groups that were targeted? And looking back on it in history, it just looks like some random war or whatever, but it could have been those evil women directing the aggression towards where they knew the good women were. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah. No,
And a lot of the and you look at the incorporation of certain elements of practices of the cults, such as the turning the man into the woman, like, that is a remnant. That's like steering towards that situation again. It's the fact that there's that craving for women to return to that state of affairs where they were venerated as these high ones. The ability and the ignorance of the men of their role in the process elevated her. So there's this craving even today.
yeah.
And especially in the cults, I would say, if you see stuff like this going on, what the hell is pagan about taking an 8-year-old boy and cutting his scrotum and telling him that he's a symbolic female now and he can be a witch now, There's nothing.
What I also loved about the breakdown of Loki by Thomas Beaumont is how he specifically mentions that Loki gave birth to Jormungandr.
Yeah.
You could look at it as effects of the comet. You could look at it as a tsunami. You could look at it in different ways. The Leviathan, the water dragon. But the Leviathan's also used for something else as well, the symbol. It's used for tyranny, right? The Leviathan, like the Vatican is the Leviathan. It seeps into all the cracks and all the nooks and crannies, and it controls all the pies from behind the scenes, or many of them and their cohorts and connections, and even their competitors, so-called competitors. So you have that idea that Loki is in some way female, right? This dark magician can switch genders, and Loki can switch genders. Well, who was the most ferocious deity of ancient ages? One I can remember from when I was doing my research was Dictyna of ancient Crete. And she was a war goddess, and she was the goddess of all the animals. She was the serpent goddess, and she was on top of this mound. Also look at this mound as all the creatures coming from her womb, right? And when all things are connected as one and you're able to tap into that, there's an immersion that takes place, an oblivion. And the promise of that, the promise of oblivion because of the cataclysm and its traumatic effects on the people who went through it, they also began to seek out that oblivion that the womb offered, a way to return to that permanently without coming back here. That idea, which others have talked about as well, I'm not the first one, but that seems congruent when you were talking about these men who almost were controlled and their minds controlled, seduced, but it's also them who bought into it and them who identified with this tyrannical mother, this ferocious mother goddess.
Indeed. And I think
Yeah.
that distortion of this whole epoch where the women were hiding the facts of paternity from the men, I believe that this epoch was a post-cataclysmic epoch.
Yeah.
And you could even look at Conan the Barbarian, the story. It's almost like they encoded only a portion of the picture into that movie.
Right.
The full picture, I think, would be that obviously, when Conan started to sneak into the temple, this lower class priest approached him and started making advances to him. So that priest was a homosexual.
Yeah.
He was also probably castrated. The movie doesn't get into this, but looking at it objectively for what it really is, you had the one dude, Thulsa Doom, and then his two lieutenants. They might have been the only three guys who weren't castrated, and the system would have been to indoctrinate everybody into the paternity lie because they would all be ignorant of the role of the father, and that could be the reason why they went out and slaughtered everybody else. Obviously, the village that Conan came from, the fatherhood principle was still intact. I would say that the Thulsa Doom folks were, in their system, it's probably safe to assume that they were keeping that paternity thing a secret and trying to operate under those, principles where it's just the woman who gets divinely conceived and all that. I think that's the whole picture. So then behind Thulsa Doom, you would have the even more powerful Sibel, and that's what those bloodlines continued to maintain down through the aeons afterwards.
And let me tell you something, this as well, the traces are still alive and well today in my city of Newcastle upon Tyne. There is a tower in the middle of the city. This is at the civic centre of Newcastle, the town hall. And when I was doing my first videos, I took a video of the civic centre and I overlaid it on top of the first tower that Conan infiltrates in the movie. And on top
Oh
of this
yeah.
tower, there is 12 serpent heads in a circle in the movie in Conan. And on the top of the civic centre in Newcastle upon Tyne is 12 seahorse heads in a circle, a zodiac. Just in the same way that that tower in Conan the Barbarian, the way that this tower is depicted. Now get this, in way back, This site used to be the site of a former brook, a Dean, a stream, a sacred spring called Magdalena Well and Magdalen Dean. And there was a chapel and a hospital there, and it was run by the nuns. The whole area was run and was owned by the nuns. And, well, what do we know about Magdalene now in the Bible? What was she a stand-in? Well, she was a stand-in for the Black Madonna. She was a stand-in for Venus and her child, otherwise known as Cybele. And there's clear signs that this cult has left their signature in the very architecture of my city. And that's partially what I go into in my book. And there's other things I've talked about in the first podcast when we talked. Right next to this building is a replica of Fingal's cave. Yeah. And there's even more than that to go into, which I will probably go into another time. But just letting that sit with people. On the Magdalene former sacred site, sacred spring, this pagan site that was co-opted by the nuns, is now a giant tower with 12 seahorse heads. By the way, seahorse is synonymous with dragon. Okay, you cannot separate the two. They were known as little dragons by the Scythians, and they were held up on the heraldry of the ancient Scythians as well. It's actually the coat of arms of Newcastle, the two seahorses, either side of a shield. I could talk about it all night. But yeah, the seahorse head, by the way, if you would just look up, you would see heads that are equine shaped. You could just look at them as horse heads. And what did the horse represent back in ancient times, according to Harold Bailey? Well, it was close to the dragon. It was also called a nag. It would appear in people's dreams as the kelpie, as the seahorse, the creature of nightmares.
Loki got pregnant as a female horse.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's excellent. Yeah, and the horse-headed goddess was Demeter, another form of Cybele. Yeah.
Interesting.
The pub that used to be there on that site was called the Grey Nag. Over 100 years ago, there used to be a pub there called the Grey Nag.
Wow.
Yeah.
And one of his really old presentations, 2012 and the Future of Mankind. This is one of the slides he shared in that presentation. He said, Dr. George W. Kreil of the Cleveland Laboratories announced that he had discovered at the heart of every living organism a tiny nucleus of energy, all aglow, with temperatures ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 degrees of heat, which he called radiogens, or hot points, precisely akin to the radiant energy of solar matter. He affirmed that a tiny particle of the sun's power and radiance was lodged within the heart of every organic unit. So, keep that in mind.
I remember in The Matrix, the most profound scene was when you see the humans all plugged into the system for their heat, for their energy. They have become the machine's batteries. And while you were talking about that, that's what came up. But go on. I want you to press on.
Now we're shifting into a group which is known as the Luciferians. The following quote comes from a book called Witchcraft and the Middle Ages by Geoffrey Burton Russell. He writes, Geoffrey of Auxerre wrote about 1150 that the Catharists taught free sex, and the Council of Rheims in 1157 condemned sexual orgies on the part of the heretics. About 1180, Joachim of Flora, describing heretics he called Paterini, implies that they had orgies, and this judgment on the Paterines was confirmed by Walter Map, writing about 1182. The sectaries, Map claimed, put out the lights and after an obscene rite proceeded to indiscriminate intercourse, each person seizing the one next to him. Allen of Lilly makes a connection between dualism and immorality explicit. The dualists say, he reported, that a person must use every means at his disposal to cleanse himself of everything earthly or diabolical clinging to him. In order to rid themselves of concern for the body, they engage in random sexual intercourse. Thus, as Koch points out, they abused the body in order to show their contempt for it, and the Catharist dislike of marriage was a result not only of their horror of imprisoning souls and bodies, but also the respect that marriage accords the body. The Luciferians, who appeared in Germany from 1227, and the Adamites of 14th and 15th century Bohemia also held, it is reported, sexual orgies in subterranean places, and argued that it was permissible to do there what was sin above the ground. The Bohemian Luciferians were similar to the Austrian. They had, however, an elaborate hierarchy with an archbishop and 7 bishops, each of whom ruled 300 heretics. They rejected the church, the pope, the idea of the resurrection. They argued that Lucifer would one day triumph and lead them into heaven with him. They met at night, and with lights extinguished, the bishop led them in sexual orgies. The Lucifer appeared to them as the king of heaven, arrayed in splendid crown, scepter, and shining clothes, and followed by many retainers. After they had practiced a kind of blasphemous communion, the lights were extinguished, and each took the one next to him. So I'm looking at this. You can see that they're messing around with the idea of light. So they're going underground, and that's implying that they're going in a place of darkness, which there's no way that the sunshine is going to, shine down there.
Yeah.
But they bring torches with them, which are a form of light. But before they start doing their thing, they put the torches out. So it's the extinguishing of light that's going on. But then after they put the lights out, that's when Lucifer shows up and he's the shining one. So there's manipulation going here with the light concept. So I wanted to draw attention to that because, like I said, you fuck with light, you fuck with gravity. And these guys are fucking with the light, obviously.
That's right.
Now, also important to pay attention to here is the dates. 1150, 1157, 1180, 1182, 1227. This was shortly after the Crusades. I think the first crusade was 1118. So after the Crusades is when you start getting these heretics popping up. I've been doing some interviews with Yaki Hagstrom where we get into this a bit because even the crusade itself, something happened after the Crusades where groups from the Middle East actually started sneaking over into the West and popping up here. So I would say that the Luciferians here, and these Catharists and these different heretic groups probably came from the Middle East.
Yeah.
Even though it's not saying that, and it won't say that explicitly in the historical records, you got to check out Ralph Ellis's work. You'll see what I'm talking about. There's an important underground thing happening after the Crusades where these really sinister people are weaseling their way into the West after the Crusades. And eventually they pretty much start taking over different societies. They start infiltrating the Vatican.
And this would be a Gnostic cult we're talking about here, right?
Well, the interesting thing, you look at the dates I just mentioned, 1150, 1157, 1180, 1182, 1227, that time period, that is after the Crusades. And I would venture to say that the reason these groups are popping up around this time is because of the groups from the East who were sneaking in to Europe because of that Iron Curtain I talked about, where the church knew the real story about Jesus and the bloodlines he was connected to. They rescripted his biography into the pauper Prince of Peace, who says that you need to turn the other cheek and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. They wrote the Gospels, handed that to the Jews, so they would have happy, nice Jews who wouldn't try to launch another rebellion against Rome. That's why they created it. But they collapse, Roman Empire collapse, church emerged. They were going on the Gospels as the basis for the Christian religion. They needed that Iron Curtain there to keep the bloodlines from the East out because they were the ones with the stories and the weird practices, the cultic practices, the Cybele cult. And we're about to get even deeper into that because Cybele is... Cybele is the origin of the etymology of Kabbalah comes from Cybele.
That's right. And it comes from fire, right? The word Kabbalah.
Another association with light, the manipulation of light.
I believe some of that is dog whistled in the Hammer horror movies when the main antagonist has a fascination with the East and antiques come from the Middle East. It's giving you every indication that this person is fully entrenched in their belief systems, whatever cultures from the cults. It's bled straight through and it's infected him, and he's brought it back, and he's trying to use that mystical knowledge to prey on people.
Yeah, and the Washington, D.C., the layout of it is the seal of Astaroth, by the way. That comes from the Middle East. There's nothing Western about it.
It's the same name as the deity that the cult in the Hammer horror movie to the devil a daughter. That is the golden figure. That's the name of it right there.
Wow. Yeah, I forgot about that. It was, actually, yeah. I remember that now.
And that's a different Hammer horror movie to the one I'm talking about, where the antagonist has this cloakroom or antique room full of this Middle Eastern paraphernalia, mystical paraphernalia. So, okay. The more I hear about these pernicious Gnostic sects, the creepier it gets, because I don't know if you've read The Trauma of Birth by Otto Rank, the Freudian psychologist.
Yes, I have.
Who was disowned by Freud. This book explains a lot, but also is terrifying when you put into context what these Gnostic cults are doing, because like, how traumatized do you have to be from the very beginning of your life to even enter into a system of ceremonies and practices that these Gnostic sects were doing? Like, the milking of children for their bodily fluids and then imbibing them with other intoxicating effects, which I do believe Otto Rank talks about this. He talks about this really disgusting, these acts, which go all the way back to the rites of passage that were part of the Bok saga. It's complicated, and it involves the excretion of bodily fluids and then being passed on to the community elder and him imbibing them as a symbol of community and togetherness. Whereas what these Gnostic cults seem to be doing is taking that very arcane, very, very ancient ceremony and inverting it, flipping it on its head, and using it to escape reality. You were saying that they want to strip away every earthly element that's in them. Redemption through sin, this idea that you can escape this world and escape the birth, life, and death cycle through these debauched ceremonies, orgies, imbibing fluids, all for the threnody of it and for the immersion in this act of utter perversion to completely strip any trace of humanity, and humanity being the thing because they see humanity and the earth, the very space that they inhabit, as a prison. They see their body as a prison. As one of the precepts of the Gnostic religion is that the creator was flawed, and he created a universe for us to live in, which was a prison, and he created our bodies, which is like a prison within a prison.
Well, they're operating from that destructive secondary layer. So they were having these impulses and emotions. It's the emotional plague at work. Whereas what is described in the Bok saga, although it sounds very strange and gross, maybe to some people, it at least was. It was not emotional plague driven. It was from the core, even though
they weren't trying to escape. They were trying to ground themselves.
Yeah, it was core impulses, the core of the human. So it wasn't distorted, and even though our standards today might look at it as gross, it's important to just make the distinction, because it can get really heady when you really start going down the rabbit hole with it, and like their weird theologies and everything. You just sometimes you just got to draw back and say, is the stuff coming out of this person's mouth coming from their core, or is it coming from their destructive secondary layer impulses? And it's obvious that the Gnostic framework and ideas and everything is coming from distorted secondary layer, destructive, confused.
This magic was a tool. And I also listened to what is being said about these Gnostic cults, and I see the inversion. I see the difference between them. I look at films like A Devil to a Daughter, that Hammer horror movie, and the occult ritual they perform with the golden crucifix and the way they hover it over her. And you were talking about it affecting light. And as we know, gold has properties in it which affect light. And when you're hovering this thing over a person's energy field, their electromagnetic field, their aura, if you like, what is that doing to that person in that ritual? And when she's being hypnotized to believe that the elder of that cult is that god of light that they are worshipping in this ceremony, it's distortions on distortions. It's schisms upon schisms. It's forcing of the splitting of a satanic ritual abuse victim so that they can control that split personality that's been separated and create a personality that's dedicated and committed to the cult and will become suicidal if you try and detach them from that.
And that's what I'm getting into next.
Go ahead, man.
The next quote comes from an Irish source, and he's talking about the Satanists in Ireland. He lived during the Irish Troubles, which was like a conflict between the North and the South of Ireland, conflict between Protestants and Catholics. It was a pretty mixed up conflict, but this guy discovered that a lot of the things going on behind the scenes were being directed by Satanists, and they were actually directing things on both sides of the conflict. So this is what he says about them. He says,
Okay.
I will now explain how they managed to persuade men and women to set up their kin to be butchered by the Satanists. These are the methods used by the Irish witches. However, witches in other countries might use different tactics. Firstly, someone does not become a killer overnight. It takes time and effort to literally transform a normal person into an unfeeling killer, a killer who will think nothing of murdering anyone or bringing their children, brothers, sisters, mothers, or fathers to be murdered in the vilest satanic rituals. The coven members choose suitable sacrifices and plan ahead for a specific Sabbath in the future. Once the sacrifice is chosen, coven witches target a confidant or close relation of the proposed sacrifice. The confidant has to be trusted completely by the sacrifice. A coven member who is well schooled in the ways of corruption and sexual matters then makes approaches to the confidant. The male or female witch seduces the confidant over a period of time using sexual techniques long known to the witches, which hook the confidant, making him or her completely dependent on the witch. These sexual techniques were known centuries ago. In the 1920s, Madame de Neglowska, a Russian writer and occultist who was an associate of MacGregor, Mathers, and Crowley, was knowledgeable in these secret sex magic techniques. I will not go into detail, but the gist of it is one partner is left hanging after sex, feeling completely inadequate and dependent on the other. Neglowska believed salvation or complete enlightenment could be achieved through extreme sex. Satanists practice tantric sex and strange bondage techniques, such as knotted cords around the neck to restrict blood flow, can give psychic vision. Michael Hutchence, an Australian rock star and friend of Kylie Minogue, died while attempting something similar. Once the confidant is hooked, dependent on the witch seducer, the next step is to desensitize the confidant to violence, bloodshed, and even murder. This is achieved by showing the confidant real-life snuff videos and movies. Because the confidant is completely under the control of the witch seducer, he or she will do anything to please the witch. Gradually, month at a time, the confidant is drawn in deeper and deeper. The next step is to enroll the confidant into the coven, and the witch brings the confidant to the coven's next Sabbath meet.
You know what I'm going to say? A film came to mind, and it's strange because I've already used the phrase as well. A film by David Lynch called The Lost Highway. It features a guy who lives in Los Angeles, and there's either 2 or 3 guys who play the same person, but when he switches personalities, when he breaks from reality, it switches to the next. So it's Bill Pullman, then it's another guy after that. And all the way throughout it, he's slowly losing his mind because this actress she's playing tricks on him. She's playing games. I believe Jorge Hagström, in one of your podcasts with him, said that the word for spell in Swedish is akin to game, or the spell means games, and she's playing these games with him all the way throughout the film. He breaks from reality. He ends up killing somebody. Towards the end of the movie, she takes him all the way to the moment of climax, and then she tears away from him and says to him, "You will never have me," and then walks away from him. The way you said that technique of leaving him hanging, I remember seeing that film, The Lost Highway. This is why I mentioned the Lost Highway syndrome, because it completely breaks him, and he's left driving away in his car, shifting from the two actors that have played him throughout the movie. And you see him, this jittery set of images which show him flicking between both actors in the car and driving furiously down this pitch black highway. There's something really dark about that movie, but David Lynch he's a mixed bag. I know people love him and hate him. I understand why. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with him as well. But he's definitely talking about something like what you were talking about there, that someone can be broken like that. And like the plague that's already in them, it's starting to grow and metastasize. And they just tinker with a person's insides to make that worse. So it takes over them until they have no control, until they break from reality.
Yeah, I don't know if you've perused any of the pickup artists or any of the manosphere stuff.
I have,
Talking
yeah.
a lot about shit tests and the way that women will test you and put these little tests and challenges and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
So we have a natural inclination to permit testing to a degree. This is like the tests are just like bottomless pit. So
She can
those
drain
movie
you of all your
directors,
energy.
yeah, the movie directors know what's up. It also reminds me of a movie called Get Carter, and they're in the car. Yeah, he's in the car with that chick, and like she's driving real fast, and she's changing the stick shift, changing gears, and she's like caressing the stick shift. Yeah, it's The Prisoner that
Did you know that Get Carter was filmed in my hometown?
really.
Yeah, it was filmed in Newcastle in England.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
The old one, right?
Yeah, it's set in Newcastle, yeah.
I gotta watch that movie again.
Yeah, it'll give you a good insight to this place. It uses all the iconic places, so definitely watch it.
The Prisoner series has one of the final episodes where that chick is after him. I think it's called like Death something about death. But a lot of the symbolism is sexual, but she's trying to kill him.
Yeah.
So there's that sexual predatory sort of play on things. But as we're seeing now, it can get out of hand sometimes.
You were talking about how these occultists use this to their own advantage and know how to hone it to get them into states, highly energetic states or psychic states. David Lynch, I've seen a clip of him where he did this in his own time, by the way. He built a man-made cave in the middle of Los Angeles, on the Los Angeles hills. And he got one of his friends, who's a DJ, to do this pulsing drone music. And inside this cave, this girl is roaming around, and she's half naked. She has her breasts out and everything. And she just walks by him every now and then. And David Lynch is hooked, like he doesn't take his eyes off her. And she just comes in every now and then, passes them. That's exactly what she's been told to do. And all the while they're filming this and interviewing David Lynch as well on what he's doing. I can't remember what he's talking about, but he's talking about the whole artistic process he's engaged in. Meanwhile, he's being tantalized in a cave with a half-naked chick walking around. He's also naked himself, getting extremely aroused to the point, but then she's ripping it away. She's walking away from him, and she does this a number of times. And I couldn't help but think of, yes, it's being used against. They're using it on the recruits for these cults, but they're also using it themselves to excite themselves to further their career or whatever. But also, I think in David Lynch's case, there was something far deeper. Some kind of sorcery definitely was going on there.
Well, it's a science that is used to hook the male, because obviously, I mean, it doesn't take
a rocket scientist to figure out, yeah.
to figure out that if a chick is doing that, if it's working on them, it's working on them. However, you got to look at the female. She's been put in a position she's power tripping is what's going on there. And, Stefan Molyneux has stated over and over and over again that power is more addictive than any drug. So these groups that teach women how to do this and put them into those scenarios, you're basically taking a woman and giving her an experience of power that can end up being very addictive, more than likely.
That's interesting. I wasn't paying that much attention to the girl, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's almost as if she was a sex slave. I mean, we don't know what happened to her afterwards, but I mean, David Lynch is 60 odd years old and she's parading around. He's just oogling at her the whole time. But at the same time, you're right. It's a power trip for her and the whole experience. What is that doing to the woman? And she's getting paid to do all this. What effect is that going to have her character in the end?
Right. Yeah. No, she's. I'm not going to say sex slave. I don't want to put a victim dynamic on
exactly.
it. But I
Neither
will say that there's definitely a power dynamic and an emotional power dynamic. She's power tripping, and power is more addictive than any drug. So
One thing's for sure. It was creepy as hell.
Yeah, it's just another way to hook. I mean, so the guy is getting hooked by the girl, and the girl is getting hooked by the power tripping that she's doing. It's sort of like the devil card and the tarot. You got the guy and the girl standing down there, and they're both chained to the fucking devil.
The whole creepiness of it and how beautiful women manage to put an invisible leash around men and the mystique of their beauty, how it traps men. We say we want beauty, and at the same time, I think we secretly hate beauty because we know that secretly it enslaves us if we become admirers of that. And also, I think there's a disdain. Women have disdain for men, a secret disdain because of that as well, because they know that you're just a sucker. If you're falling for the whole beauty trick, then you fail at the first step. But then again, that's a lot of what women are looking for at the same time because they're so mixed up.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that myself. It's basically a distorted situation that large swaths of the planet are dealing with right now. It's pretty messed up. But yeah, the next quote comes from an article I found online from mysteriousuniverse.org. The Sinister Saga of a Dragon Cult. This is just a small clipping of the article.
Okay.
It says that Aleister Crowley was linked to all manner of secret societies and the occult, and to Loch Ness itself. These were further factors which led Holliday to suspect the presence of a dragon-worshipping group in the area, as well as attempts by the secret group to try and invoke supernatural serpents from the dark waters of the loch. The mysterious group at Loch Ness, which was said to worship Tiamat, a terrifying Babylonian snake goddess or sea dragon, who was revered as much as she was feared. In Babylonian myths, Tiamat is a huge, bloated female dragon that personifies the saltwater ocean, the water of chaos. The conjurer had to take great heed when summoning the spirit form of Tiamat, lest violent, deadly forces might be unleashed. So Tiamat is, from what I understand, an actual planetary body that used to exist.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's associated with the cataclysm because that planet was actually destroyed. So
I heard it was a watery planet, like an ocean planet as well, which if it could really collided with this planet, it would have seemed as if it were being attacked by a Leviathan, like a water dragon.
Yeah, I've heard that that's what the Great Floods came from. So, have you heard of Randall Carlson?
I haven't.
Oh, dude, you're gonna love listening to some Randall Carlson. So he's a Freemason. He's from Georgia. He has some podcasts out there, and he's talking about the floods that have happened, the great floods, which there's been like so many mega floods. Like, for example, the city of Portland, Oregon is a mile below what it used to be. Like the surface of the ground used to be a mile higher than it is currently. Got washed out by a fucking mega flood. It's been a while since I've listened to him, but he's got all of this crazy information, man, about these super floods that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
But there's all this water that potentially can hit our planet at any given time, create a new flood. It's possible that comes from Tiamat, the water planet, which used to be intact. It's like now it's just floating out there like big frozen chunks of ice that could drift into our orbit at any time and cause another flood.
No, and I find it very weird. Also, I've talked about this in the past, but there are 12 seahorse heads on top of the Civic Center in Newcastle. And I just find that there's 12 constellations in the zodiac. They're in a circle, just as the zodiac is displayed. But they're all of the water element. They're linked with Poseidon, the god of the seas. They carry Poseidon's chariot. They pull Poseidon's chariot. And also, Commons Beaumont talks about the importance of Cetus, the constellation Cetus. And I believe that these 12 seahorse heads on top of the Civic Center relate to Cetus. I think they relate to times of catastrophe, just as Poseidon was known as the Earth Shaker. He was a god of earthquakes. That's what it means. The Earth Shaker. He didn't just create tidal waves, but he also created what accompanied them, which was these massive quakes, which created massive upheavals and destroyed civilizations. And I think these 12 seahorse heads are a constant reminder. This thing was built in the 1960s. And one of the symbolic meanings of the seahorse is rigidity and following the rules and being an upstanding citizen, always doing what you're told. I think that is partially how they do it as well. I think they traumatize people into following the rules. They remind on a constant basis what will happen to them if they don't. And as much as these leaders, these elites, like to use solar symbols to promote how amazing they are and how glorious they are and how they're like a shining light, they also hold over us the fact that they could call down cataclysm, they could call down crisis at any moment. And so you better do as you're told. Otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So it's like talking about this conjurer who's conjuring Tiamat. And it says he had to take great heed when summoning the spirit form of Tiamat, lest violent, deadly forces might be unleashed. So it's like they know that it's dangerous.
Yeah, go to
so
war.
That kind of goes with that following the rules kind of thing that you're talking about, because it's that anxiety that the ancient people faced, where they really thought that they had to do certain and follow certain rules to avoid another catastrophe.
True.
And the priesthood took advantage of that.
And of course, when they was sending people over the seas to die on the beaches of Normandy, all they had to say was, if you don't do this, the women will hand you white feathers. You will be known as cowards. And as Stefan Molyneux brought up in one of his podcasts, that's it. That's the end of your genetic line. No more babies for you. You were a coward during the war. You didn't die on this beach, so you don't deserve to procreate anymore.
I wonder if those women were power tripping, if it gave them a certain feeling of power to know that all they had to do was threaten a man with handing them a white feather, and that gave them the power to see that man go and run up a beach with machine guns firing at him.
And if that didn't get you, they'd send you to jail if you avoided the draft, I think, unless you had a good excuse. And so, yeah, it's either you don't procreate, you become known as a coward, you go to jail. And those are your three choices. And the third one being go to war. And pretty much certain that you're going to die. But yeah, the women power tripping. Yeah, I wonder how that made them feel. I noticed that they don't like to talk about that much, but they did still talk about that in primary school when I was a boy. So I wonder if they still do that. I bet they don't talk about the things that we're talking about in the side notes, though.
Yeah. Next quote comes from Michael Desarian and his Atlantis presentation. He says, John Dee was one of the most powerful black magicians in the world, and he worked with an Irish clairvoyant called Edward Kelly. He had the greatest collection of books, more than was in any library for hundreds of years. John Dee was a leader of British intelligence. He opened up a pan-dimensional portal. There are magical principles. He used a system of magic known as Enochian magic. In John Dee's system of magic, he was able to open up portals literally to other dimensions, to oversouls. John Dee was given volumes of information. They even say that his consciousness was frazzled because of this information that was coming down. He had other people all over Europe, famous magicians in Europe, all working on deciphering this information that came down. The oversouls told John Dee that they had to learn how to create matter from energy, but first they had to learn how to release energy from matter. They also had to learn the mysteries of silicon. So John Dee, he's known as the first 007. He worked for Queen Elizabeth I, and he signed all of his documents 007. So his system of magic, Enochian magic, like I said, he worked for Elizabeth I for England. Ever since his time, there's been one 007 for England because he trained someone. And that person, before he died, he trained someone. That person, before he died, he trained someone. They've all been carrying forward this Enochian magic and how to use it up until now. And the most recent one that was trained is named Tim Rifat. And this guy, he claims that he is the last one who's ever trained. And now, now he's making YouTube videos. Can't you fucking believe that shit? But yeah, this dude, so apparently he had a falling out with England. So now he kind of, so I guess he's not going to train another one for England. So England's kind of shit out of luck. And he does black magic on him now.
Right,
But
yeah.
anyways,
Of course
I have some commentary from him.
Yeah. Okay.
So this following quote comes from Tim Rifat himself, the last 007, trained in the Enochian magic for England. This is what he says. Love is the thing that changes the basal point, the resting point of the Higgs field. That's why aliens farm humans for love. Humans are just love generators, and they're all tuned to give their energy to the end user, the Elohim, Greys, Crown 007, etc. And simply put, all love affairs end up destructively, because even if you don't fall out of love, you get the negative one, which is death, and the anti-good one. The missing part of all of the stuff that you can get online or in books is that magicians like myself were trained primarily in ritual and all of the technology of sucking up magic, so that when we carry out our rituals, reality changes in confirmation with our will. But for you, with no access to magic and locked out of the system, because you've never been given access to it, you can simply be a normal person going to Freemasonic monuments, trying to suck out the magic from them, going to churches, trying to suck out the magic from them, try and suck out the magic from Illuminati events like the Super Bowl or Olympics. None of it works because the magic of the Illuminati is that they lock out the non-Illuminati from using the magic. Being able to collect and store magic was developed by John Dee. His colleague, Kelly, communed with entities that called themselves Enochian angels, and these Enochian angels taught Kelly Enochian magic. Enochian magic was the basis of Elizabeth I and England's change from being the poorest country in Europe, about to be conquered by the Spanish, to the richest country in Europe. The Enochian angels taught Kelly how to store magic and quartz crystals in his crystal ball. How? Well, when he was watching them, they would form a vortex, the angels dancing around the head of a pin. And the dancing of the angels in a vortex would be clockwise to store magic, which would be used to do positive things. And they would dance in a vortex in an anti-clockwise direction. You could store magic, which was negative, which could be used to make people ill with the evil eye, give them boils, warts, give them diseases, bring them bad luck, etc. So John Dee got the technology to utilize magic with quartz crystals, which have the Enochian angels inputted into them. In Russia, these vortexes, which can store magic, are called torsion fields. And these torsion fields can travel at speeds which are almost instantaneous, much faster than the speed of light, can pass through any shielding. You can project the vortex out of your crystal at a target. The Russians got this torsion field concept from the Nazis, the Annenerb. The Nazis, of course, got it from occult books. Remember witches dancing around in a circle? I met the leader of the Wiccans. He was a warlock, and he explained to me that the Wiccans had wanted to stop people accessing supernatural spirit magic, and had gone around to Stonehenge and all the power spots, and simply moved the vortexes of power, which they were generating, into psi space, and then moved them into other locations. So you get a coven of witches, they go to Stonehenge, then they do a ritual which would have to involve a ritual sacrifice. In the UK, we have endemic child murder. We've got 567,000 official female rape molestations, 102,000 male child rape molestations, and many child murders. And the power of a child murdered in a black mass can open up a big anti-clockwise vortex, the Luciferic force, which when you input into Stonehenge, which is, of course, a big clockwise vortex to produce loads of energy from the Stargate there, you can see that it will cancel out the vortex from Stonehenge. And remember, all these Satanists use extreme methods on the children. Kathy O'Brien and loads of other people have documented these things. And of course, when you get a clockwise vortex and an anti-clockwise vortex, they cancel each other out, which means that it is very easy then to move the vortex once you've canceled it. So the circle of witches can then move to another location, and at the location of the estate of the Wiccan, they can then simply hold hands where they collect in the left hand with their hand pointing upwards and push out with their hand pointing downwards, and then move the power around in a clockwise direction, dance around in a clockwise direction, etc. They then can restore the vortex in the estate of the Wiccan. So when people go to Stonehenge, there is no vortex there because the dead child's soul acts as a block. So when the vortex tries to manifest there, the dead child's soul blocks it, and instead it's diverted to the estate where the Wiccans have set up their power circle. Rather like putting a dam in the river and then diverting the flow to another direction, using the dead child's soul as a dam. That's Tim Refat.
So a few things about Stonehenge. I've been watching the prehistory guys on YouTube. And these guys are two English guys who go around a lot of the famous sites and not so famous sites in and around Britain, Ireland, Scotland. And they look at the stone circles, they talk about what they know. And they have found evidence that this igneous blue rock, volcanic rock that Stonehenge is built out of, it comes from Wales, but the stones in Avebury come from a place called Cheviot Hills, not far from where I live. It's in Northumberland. It's on the border of Scotland and England. And in this outcrop called the Dunyan Crags, this outcrop of blue igneous stone. It's a special type of volcanic sandstone found in the Cheviot Hills. It was dragged all the way from Scotland to the bottom of England in Wiltshire. And the way that the prehistory guys, in their mainstream view, carefully but gently, and let people decide for themselves, but they say that this is clearly evidence that they were bringing their home, the place that they loved, the place that they knew. They were bringing elements of that and bringing it to this place in Wiltshire, and they also did it at Stonehenge. But in Avebury, in particular, if you were to do a study, Commons Beaumont talks about this, and also Harold Bailey talks about this in his book Archaic England. They bring up this guy called Stuckley, who mapped the whole place out and made his own interpretations. I like this idea that they were bringing these elements that they knew and loved to this place. And as we were talking about in the beginning, Abram, the Hiram, who set up his war factories down in the south because they had to emigrate, he brought this love, these remnants, with them because they were forced out and they had to move. This became their power base in Wiltshire and Somerset, and according to Commons Beaumont, became the site of a great many invasions because of the war factories that were there. It became the powerhouse that gave these ancient patriarchs their means of holding as much dominion as the Romans did back then, and it made them such a formidable powerhouse that resisted the Romans for so long. But now these sites, because they're tied to estates and rich cults that have been here for a very, very, very long time, they've been misaligned. They could have been from the start. We have no idea just to the extent what intentions these ancient archmaguses were up to. But just the idea that they're now being used to suck energy, love energy. If you even just think about the word love, it comes from Jove, Jupiter, God, the Els, the Elohim. And if you don't understand what that means, then every time you say the word love, you're assigning that, you're spelling that feeling, that emotion, that energy. You're spelling it and you're dedicating it in movies, in the music that people listen to, this horrible music that talks about love endlessly and talks about how much I love you and how much I want to be with you and how much love I have. And it's all about the love. Who's got the love? Who's got the love? You've got the love. It's like this constant amplification. It's this channeling of catharsis, funneling it into these streams, which are then fed off from these elites. When you were talking there about love, how we're like love factories, think about the Green Mile at the end when John Coffey's about to die and he says to Tom Hanks, they kill him with their love. But that scene comes to mind. They kill them with their love. What did he mean by that? Was that just a throwaway line? Or was there something more profound that Spielberg was hinting at there, dog whistling about there? Well, I think so. I think he knows. I think he knows exactly what love is. And we should possibly start using a different word for this emotion before we curse ourselves for like we have been for a long time. And people who listen to this music or watch these films, which is all about love, it's all about, and love is all that matters, etc. Well, really, is it? Or are they trying to condition you into giving all of your real love away so they can use it, so they can feed from it?
Yeah, it's like a certain percentage of the love gets siphoned off. So it's not even, yeah. I wonder how many of those songs would change if the people writing the songs realized why their love isn't coming back.
Yeah,
100%. It seems like a lot of the music is about the music itself is
killing you softly, right?
supposedly talking about love, but at the same time, it's kind of whining about the fact that it's not coming back the way they think it should. Well, wonder if more people realized that it was getting diverted into other channels. People maybe would stop whining about it so much and actually really look into where's that love going.
Yeah, think about the Riddler in the film Batman Forever, where he's built this machine that can suck off people's brain waves. But what are people doing when they're at home and they're staring at their screen? Well, they're in this like dazed state, aren't they? They're like big, massive smiles on their face, looking all goofy, like they're in their safe zone, like they're just all cozy. Meanwhile, the Riddler's feeding off all this energy. He's getting hyped from it. He's getting energized. He's aroused. He's taking all of their secrets, and he's just growing more powerful by the day. And the people love it. They can't get enough of it. Everybody wants to buy one of these things and give it away, right? Give it away, give it away, give it away now, as the Red Hot Chili Peppers said.
Well, shit, if the love wasn't getting siphoned off, then Red Hot Chili Peppers would have already declared world peace and everything by now.
Yeah, when you start to break it down, like you get these songs come back to you, like when you start really thinking deeply about.
No, I
these
like
love
Red
songs.
Hot Chili Peppers, kind
Yeah.
of, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah, me too, right?
But I mean, it's like, where'd all that fucking love go? Somebody suck that shit up for damn sure. You know?
What are they saying when they're saying give it away, give it away, give it away now?
Right. Free
What
love.
Yeah, free
The
love.
Luciferians were preaching free love back in 1120, you know, like
Wow.
the fucking 1100s. Yeah, free love, man. We're
Yeah, it's all new.
Luciferians.
It's all new, Caleb. What are you talking about? This stuff's only been around since the 60s, right?
Right.
Right.
So I have a statement from a confidential source about covens in the United States. So he says, in the covens, you got young groups of kids who are just getting into it. They coax them into it, telling them that you can use your energy and use the energy of the trees. And it's all a lie. It just brings them in. In each circle or coven, there's a higher person that runs the circle. They're attached to a higher level. And they get these circles and kids to sit around and do circles and things, not realizing that the energy they're putting out is just being sucked up and used by somebody else. They use the energy to feed their demons or do other things. They can feed on negative energy. They can feed on positive energy until they drain them of all their energy, and then they move on. And Satanism, it's all about control. Mind control, body control, control of the spirit. And the upper ones are the only ones who have the knowledge of how to do all this. The lower ones get a little glimpse of it. So they transmit the stolen energy from person to person. They can even transfer that energy to someone far away, even in another country. If you've got a circle of 200 people, you got one guy there who's the one. Nobody knows because they all think that it is one circle all doing it together. Bullshit. There's one guy there who knows what's happening. So yeah, they're all holding hands or giving it away, giving it away, giving it away now. Then there's one guy there who's sucking it all up. And his intent is to transmit it to the higher energy that can open it up and get it out to the galaxy, the universe, or whatever. A lot of these locations and events are a feeding ground. They open up these portals of energy and feed on these people. They go there with good intent, but leave feeling drained and feeling bad. They start them out young. Most of the people in these circles don't know what's going on. Knowledge is power. That's why they got the magic books that only certain individuals are allowed to read. All these people who are in black magic think they are going up the line. They think they are going to get more knowledge, but they're being tricked because the knowledge they're given is fake. But to us, it feels real. They all want more power. They boost their egos so they can harvest energy from someone who's ego tripping. And then when their ego's torn down, they can harvest the energy from that. As long as it takes them up to a higher position, they'll take out everybody they know. They don't even care. I'll also say that this statement is confirming the quotes I've shared up to this point. But this person doesn't even fucking read. This is with their own eyes, man, what they're reporting on. They get them believing it's all about nature. We're all a part of nature. We're all part of the same energy as nature. So we can all sit here and think about nature and produce this nice, good, positive energy. Meanwhile, you got someone over here taking that positive energy and using it. Just because it's positive energy doesn't mean he can't use it for negative. That gives him more power. He's not going to tell these people what he's doing. If you want to go and study energy, do your own. Trust what you know. Don't trust what this guy over here is telling you just because he's been in it for 50 years. He's been in it for 50 years for a reason. It's so subtle, nobody knows it. They don't want people to connect and see what's going on around them. If they saw what was going on, they could actually change. That's the last thing they want, is for people to see what's going on. About 80% of the people in these circles don't know what they're being used for. So he goes on to explain how they set up these small rings of people and they're oblivious. Like 80% of the people there are oblivious. They don't know that two of the people that they're actually sitting with are connected to this hidden hierarchy. So this is actually going on in the United States. You know, this confirms a lot about what Ted Gunderson was exposing. Ted Gunderson actually focused on physical crimes, you know, people who would actually get sacrificed, people who would actually get murdered. What's going on here is something more subtle. It's black magic, it's energy manipulation. So there's not necessarily body bags associated with it, or not physical murders. But, you know, at a certain point, I kind of thought, the notion of like, you know, maybe murdering somebody with black magic, or feeding demons, or things like that, or conjuring demons, was kind of like bullshit. But I'm coming to a point where I can kind of understand, even scientifically, like how that actually is a reality.
The way I see it up there, okay, so they're using the love of nature to get people to follow their rules, to get people to do what they want, and to also feed off them, and to also create situations where they can harvest more energy. But then there's the other side of it as well. These cults that are so debaucherous that they are going against nature. So they're using this hatred of nature. And what is nature anyway? Well, nature is the mother. Mother Nature, Mother Earth. And there's a theme there, right? And it's the same thing with these cave cults, the cave obsessed cults. They go underground to do their ceremonies, to be closer to the mother. But also, if you were to look at it from the hatred of nature and the debaucherous cults, where it's all about stripping them of any humanity, they go into the mother's womb to defile it. So either way, they're getting the same result, just using different motives. But even a hatred of the mother stems originally from a love of the mother that was denied or neglected. That's why they seek the safety of the womb, or they seek to pollute it. And I find it interesting, again, you know, that lure, the lure of women, the lure of beauty. From a Freudian perspective, the way that mother's beauty imprints on a man, that affects him for the rest of his life. That affects who he falls in love with. That affects his relationships with all the females around him. And I think that deserves careful attention. something that we'll probably have to parcel out a lot more, because I'm very much interested in psychology, although I'm a bit nervous to talk about it because I need to brush up on a few things. But this psychology, it's really important. I think I heard a term recently, which I'd heard before, but the way in which it was said, it was quite profound. Matrophobia. That's stemming from the love of nature, a blind love of nature. That stems from matrophobia, because that again is propitiation. It's I must love the mother even though she can hurt me, even though she can kill me at any time. Going into a cave, that reminds you immediately of where you are, whose dominion you're in. I also think entering these stone circles, that evokes that love for Mother Nature, the cosmic mother. I like to break down words, and if you break down the word magnet, you get mag and net. And mag and meg came from words meaning and alluding to Cetus or the Leviathan or the dragon. Mag, meg, mega, Long Meg, the stone circle, Long Meg in Cumbria. Other places like that, in Northumbria, again, along Hadrian's Wall, there's a place called Old Meggy's Dean. These words, they tie back into places that were devoted to goddess worship. The Leviathan, the dragon, the great mother. Magnet, before I was saying, it's like this underlying force that pervades the universe, the electromagnetic spectrum. Who made the word magnet? I haven't even looked this up, or which culture coined it, because it's such an apt word to use. The magnet, the mega net, the giant spider's web of the great mother spider of the universe that holds it all together, and which she can pull the strings at any time to cut that off. It ties back to the Norns, the Fates. And even on the site, Old Meggy's Dean is a temple to a goddess called Coventina, and in it was found an altar with 3 female figures on it. Well, of course, 3 female figures. What does that lead back to? The 3 witches of Macbeth, going back even further, the ancient Greeks with their 3 fates, and of course, the 3 Norns. So we have all that.
The 3, I forget what they're called. In Irish mythology, you have the 3 Megans, I think they're called.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, like these three witches. Like when Nuada gets his hand cut off, before the next war, they put him to sleep and create a new arm for him, but it's the 3 witches that do it for him. They use their magic to create a new arm for him. But you have those 3 women. And I always thought it weird with the Conan the Barbarian. You got those 3 dudes, but they all have long hair. It's like they're alluding to the 3 witches kind of concept.
That's right. No, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's so much in that movie. I was just thinking there, because of the nature of what we've been talking about, my mind keeps on fixating on certain points. And one of these points that came up was that they're keeping the cycle of catastrophe going. The way that the ancient Greeks used to reenact the movements of the celestial bodies through these plays dedicated to Hermes, through these theaters, through these amphitheaters, the plays that they would put on. They were trying to reenact the actions of the gods that they were venerating. And these worshippers of catastrophe, of chaos, when they're committing these atrocious acts in these cults and they are doing these sex acts, it's almost as if they're emulating the collisions of the past, the worlds that collided with us, emulating the Venus and Tiamat collisions, emulating the plagues, comet spring, inverting all sacred ceremonies of remote antiquity, reenacting that moment of oblivion over and over again and amplifying it to make sure that their little batteries, their little energy lamps that they're feeding from, that they stay in that state. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I think I wrote something down and I sent it to you, and it was about how if Jeffrey Walensky is right and that our magnetic field of our planet is de-amplifying slowly, it's losing its magnetic field slowly over millennia, then it would stand to reason that there probably isn't going to be some massive catastrophe in the future like we've seen in the past, because the planet just doesn't have the power to bring that on anymore. If we were to stop these cults from dominating the planet with their global psychological and spiritual inversion, operation of inversion, then we'd be free of catastrophe and we'd be able to come back to some kind of new golden age. But because they keep on reacting these moments of oblivion and catastrophe and creating these manufactured crises like we've just seen with Corona and Ukraine and now the recessions, and it keeps going on. Before that, there was 9/11 and other things that have came after that, the 7/7 bombings in London. There's nothing new under the sun. As long as that black sun's up there, and as long as they keep reminding people that it's there. I know.
Well,
It's
if there's
probably...
one thing that we've
Go
revealed
ahead.
as well,
Yeah.
if we've revealed one thing in addition to how our power is being used by other people, it's the fact that we actually do have power. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taking it from us. But the first step is realizing your own power and not allowing it to be used for any of those above purposes.
A more frightening thought: we are addicted as a species, and that there's a part of us that's calling out for them to keep creating manufactured crises, to keep doing this stuff behind closed doors, to keep raping children, to keep this whole cycle of enlightenment and oblivion.
That train of thought doesn't dead end at that point, because although you're not wrong, the idea then to move forward would be to take the knowledge that people are addicted or have cravings that exercise them, but sort of the same way that they do with that Wicker Man ritual, but actually tell them what's going on. Be like, it
Not
happens.
just tell them, but you got to get them to feel it somehow. Remember, people, as you said a few times
Something
this
is
week,
better than nothing. Yeah,
people
but I
are
mean, like, yeah,
irrational, and we need
right.
something irrational to get through to people. And you were totally right about this, by the way. I really wanted to hit on this point. People are not rational, and you need almost an irrational solution to hit at people in an unconventional way.
Say at a major football game, they just come out and said, had somebody speak for 10 minutes and say that this is like a ritual, and this is kind of like how it's working on you. Okay, have a nice day, enjoy your game, you know. And then
Right.
it's like it would bring it into the consciousness. You know, you're still gonna fucking watch the football game, but at least now you know that you have this impulse that took you there and where it came from.
Sounds like a Bill Hicks skit, doesn't it? Like, oh, by the way, we can all come together and tap into this energy field. Have a nice day. Enjoy the game.
Yep.
You know?
Basically, I mean that's really where we're at right now. Like that Bill Hicks thing, the news. When's the last time they just came on and told you all the good news?
Exactly. You know, the amount of times I've fantasized about taking control of the BBC for just 10 minutes and being able to put on there whatever I wanted and just take it over guerrilla style.
Well,
No,
if we are being energetically fed upon, that's like a parasite. And what happens is that a parasite usually has mechanisms which cause extreme discomfort when its existence is threatened. So if you have gut parasites and you start changing your regimen to flush it out, that parasite is going to start releasing toxins or amplify your cravings for
right.
sugar and whatnot. So it operates like that on the energy level. And if you started dumping truth bombs on people like we are, they're not going to know what the fuck's happening, but they're going to start flipping out. But that's what we're doing anyways, because we don't care. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously though,
I was going to say, let's just put out some solutions out there, some really simple solutions that I try to do in my daily life. I do martial arts. I'm terrible at fighting, but I do martial arts for the discipline to stretch my muscles that never get stretched, to reorientate myself on this very disorientated world. I try to eat right. I try to get out into nature. This all helps. This all helps to clean out your energy field as well. Listening to the right music. I recommend Pantera for a powerful, masculine tone to their sound if you like heavy music. Work hard at something that you love. Do music. Get involved in music any way you can. And art.
If anybody listening is like, what the hell? Y'all were just talking about these cults and crazy people, and you're talking about painting or whatever. Well, didn't we just expose that they're getting all their power from your energy? So, yeah, take your energy back, man. Go into nature. Right. Yeah. Pull the battery out. Pull the battery out of the matrix, and you're the battery. So,
think a little bit more when you go to these monuments in and around these cities, and you're like, "Ooh, that's so nice. Let me take a picture next to it and send it on Facebook, and so we can show it off to everybody." It's all novel. It's the novelty. You know, love my novelty. But the fact is, you have so much novelty within you, and that's just dying to be expressed. And even people who say they aren't good at art, they don't have an ounce of art in them or music. I don't think that's true. I think everybody has their own way of getting into it. It's in our blood. It's written into my birth chart. My Chiron is in Gemini, okay? So no wonder I want to heal with my words. No wonder I want to heal with my music. And I exorcise my demons that way as well. Once you start to learn about your own birth chart, you can link it to your art, which is what I'm finding out and getting a feel for how I'm going to do that soon. But yeah, so it's all interconnected. I think Marcus Aurelius said that everything is interconnected. It all leads to the source eventually. I just wanted to put some solutions out there rather than ending it on that sour note that we often come to in these conversations because it's so fucking dark.
Like I said, it was going to be a John Carpenter movie with a happy ending.
You predicted that, bro. I love that. Yeah, there's always so much more I could talk about, but I've had a really good time, Caleb, and I really appreciate you coming on, man. You take care of yourself.
You too.
All right.
Have a good night.